Hey guys, Sean here. Welcome to the F1 word and to our end of season waffle, or let's talk as we call it, because it sounds better than waffle. Much better than waffle. You're all saying waffles in the chat, so let's say waffles again. Why not? Thank you for joining us. It's going to be a lot of fun today. I have got a guest with me, not some guest, a guest with me, which will be awesome. We'll go through that in just a moment. It's also my first one, so bear with me, wearing my geeky reading specs. So you can't see that, but I can now see you all. It's great. I can actually read your comments for a change. So if I go waffy halfway through, it's because of that. But anyway, that doesn't matter. Usual heads up for things like this, and you'll get this a lot in December. This isn't going to be like a full-on season review. We may not get to every team and every driver. We're just going to sit, have a chat about the season as a whole, pick a driver of the season at the end of it, which could be the easiest one we've ever picked. I think most of us are probably going to agree on that one. Maybe a surprise of the season or something like that. And of course, we'll get some of your questions as well. Now, bear with us here because it's been a while since we've done this. So let's see how we go and see if everything's working. As say, for the first, believe it or not, we're 8 days away from it being a year since I last said these words. Good afternoon, Stuart.
Good afternoon. Can you hear me all right?
I can. All good. Perfect.
Excellent. It still works. Nice to talk to you again.
Yes, and you. How? Oh, I mean, obviously we've spoke a bit, but you have to go into detail. But how have you been generally? You know, not too bad. Enjoyed the season?
Yeah, it's been an interesting season, hasn't it? You kind of have to put to the back of your mind that it's been absolutely dominated by one person. And if you look beyond that, it's actually been pretty interesting and exciting to watch and pretty close. And had a lot of interesting sort of development battles, cars starting off pretty dire and then really working their way up the grid and then some of them going the opposite way. So yeah, it's been actually pretty interesting if you just kind of look behind P1.
Yeah, I said after the Abu Dhabi or in the Abu Dhabi reaction that was kind of the perfect race to sum up 2023 in some ways, in that Max Verstappen kind of controlled that, was comfortable, barely touched. But behind that, there was plenty going on, and that's sort of how the season felt for me. If you're a Max Verstappen and Red Bull fan, it's been the best season in the world ever. But if you're a bit more of a neutral, then maybe away from the championship fight, you might say it's been a bit dull in the championship fight. But when you look back behind that, it's been really interesting. And you bring up there about teams moving forward and going backwards. I mean, the Aston Martin McLaren dynamic was really fascinating to me. You know, I'm not great on the technical stuff, as you know, but that fantastic start from Aston Martin and Alonso, and then McLaren kind of looking like they're absolutely nowhere. Are they going to write the year off and focus on next year with the new wind tunnel coming in? And then all of a sudden they appear out of nowhere and they're the big challengers to Red Bull. I think actually behind the championship, it's actually been a really interesting season. And I don't think it's been, potentially controversial opinion, half as bad as perhaps social media would have you believe. It's not been the best season. Of course it hasn't, you know, in terms of championship fights. It's not going to go down as a 2012 kind of thing, for example, is it? At all. But I've still enjoyed it mostly. And you know, Mercedes fluctuating a bit and Ferrariing, you know. I've enjoyed it mostly. Although I will admit, I did put it in my notes actually, and I didn't know how to word this, so I've kind of done my best with this one. As much as I love Formula One and I really appreciate what Verstappen and Red Bull have done this year, the final few races really did feel a bit tedious, is probably the wrong word, but almost as though we were just waiting for 2024. It was all sort of wrapped up apart from P2 in the constructors, wasn't it? And even the P2 in the drivers was done pretty early. So it kind of felt like we were just grinding to the end of the season a bit. And is that something that's only going to get worse, Stuart, as we get to 24, 25, 30, 50 races a year, whatever they decide to do?
Yeah, I think the utter domination, alongside the very, very long season, meant by the end we were all a little bit tired. And if they had, you know, if there's still been a bit of a fight going on, we might have been a bit more interested. But it did kind of feel like, I don't know how you felt. I felt like this season has gone on 400 years.
It's about that, isn't it?
when I was preparing for this and just going back over some old races and things like that, I was like, I cannot remember this at all. Going back to think and remembering Australia, the chaos in Australia and things like that, and being like, oh yeah, that was this year. But to be fair, actually, to the championship, and I will actually say, I don't want to put a downer on what Verstappen and Red Bull have done, because that's incredible. I think if you're given a couple of years to kind of simmer off on that, I think we'll look back at it as being quite glad that we were able to witness such an incredible feat of what was 22 race wins out of 23.
21.
Is it 20?
Out of 22,
oh
wasn't
yeah,
it?
because we lost the race, didn't we? But
Yeah.
still unbelievable, and 1,000 race leading laps from Verstappen and things like that. I think that's quite astonishing to witness, and I think we should be glad sometimes that we get to see things like this. But we still had the where the McLarens were going to finish. That battle for fourth in the championship, even though it's only fourth, it was actually quite exciting. Didn't really get finished till sort of the second half of that last race. And Leclerc jumped up from I think seventh to fourth and fifth in the end. So there was a lot going on, and if you had certain stakes in certain drivers, I think you'd be quite excited right to the end.
Yeah, I think it's interesting you say. I think I messaged you, didn't I? I said I think the one thing that I said more than anything watching all the highlights back was, oh yeah, I forgot about that. It's just such a long season. I mean, Australia was absolutely mental, wasn't it? When you look back and watch that, and Zandvoort as well. It's amazing the things you forget, but they just kept coming, didn't they? The races thick and fast. But I thought we'd try and break it up into first half of the season, up to the summer break, and then second half of the season, obviously after the summer break. But we end up where we end up. That's how these streams go, and that's perfectly fine, nice and relaxed about it. But I did want to start by having a chat about the championship battle. Right, now that's done. I mean, look, to be fair, I've put here, for the 22 races, no, there was no championship fight really, was there? But those opening 4-5 rounds, it did look as though, or a lot of people kept telling me that there was going to be a championship fight. You know, come on, Sean, you're being really unfair to Sergio Perez here. He's won 2 of the opening 4 races. How can you be writing him off in the championship? Why are you saying that Max is going to disappear with this and he's got no chance? And I said at the time, I likened it to, and it's no shade at Bottas at all. I know people think that I absolutely loathe him for some reason, but probably because I always speak negatively about it, that's probably why. But likened it to Bottas at Mercedes with Hamilton in that, 2019, Bottas came out really strong, really fighting, very, very strong. Picked up that great win, that to whom it may concern over team radio, all of that. That was brilliant, and it was great to see him bounce back after a difficult 2018. But I never believed he would be in that championship fight because Hamilton's another level, and that's exactly the same as I felt with Sergio Perez. Yes, he won 2 of the opening 4, but Max Verstappen's just on a completely different level, so I didn't actually believe that was going to be a season-long fight. But a lot of people believe there could have been. Did you feel Perez was in it at all, or were you a bit like me?
I'm a terrible optimist, and when I see like those opening 4 or 5 races, and you think, and it looks like Perez has stepped it up a gear and might be looking to take it to Verstappen, I do kind of start to believe a little bit, but that didn't last very long. I mean, I know what a force to be reckoned with Verstappen is, but you do start to just start to believe a little bit. And I've got nothing against Verstappen at all, but you do kind of want someone to be there to challenge, whether it's his teammate, whether it's Leclerc, whoever it is, or even Sainz, it looks like at some points. But yeah, I think that had kind of gone away by the time sort of Monaco came around. I think it's a funny one, Perez, really, because he after that kind of strong starts the season, he went off the boil so hard. He had such a struggle in qualifying. Was it like 5 races in a row we didn't get into Q3? And while he did some great recovery in the races, thanks to what a great car that is, partly because he is a good racing driver, I think I don't know if he just had this crisis of confidence that he never quite recovered from, but there were times when he was leading the race and Verstappen just breezed past him. So an interesting one that. But no, yeah, I think by about 6 races in, we kind of knew what we were looking at for a season. Having said that, I mean, if we go into going into 2024 and seeing how a lot of these teams have turned their car around from what they turned up with in Bahrain in both testing and the race, I will probably have this sense of optimism with me that anyone can change their fortune around, no matter how they are after like Monaco or Spain. No,
that's a fair point. It's also, I mean, I hope that Perez can go away this winter and whatever. I mean, maybe talk to Valtteri about it. Whatever Bottas did between 2018 and the start of 2019, maybe he needs to go and do the same. Wherever he went on holiday, go and do the same, because I'd love Checo to turn it around. And I say a lot. I mean, I defend him a lot. I think that he's shown he's a better driver than what we've seen for much of this season. That doesn't mean he's going to get that back, of course. Drivers fall off, it happens. But it was Miami, wasn't it? I think really was. Imagine he's on pole, Max Verstappen's down in P9. He's won 2 of the opening 4 races. It was a bit of an open goal, and Max Verstappen came through the field, passed him 5.5 seconds up the road, I think it was, come the end of the race. Probably not pushing towards the end as hard as he could have done. And I think if you're Sergio Perez and you're looking at that, you're thinking, well, what's I'm not saying he did say this, but I can imagine me in that situation, which is why I'm not a racing driver. I'd have gone, well, what's the point? What is the point? It's such a kick in the gut to miss what was such a huge open goal. I don't know if it would have given the lead in the championship at that point. It would have been close, wouldn't he? But if he'd have won that, maybe things would have moved on, because then Monaco in qualifying one, was he over driving to compensate? I don't know. That crash that he had, the big one, and then, like you say, the five qualifying exits before Q3 on the bounce, not good enough. Which, I mean, you can be the biggest Sergio Perez fan in the world, I don't think anybody can honestly sit there and say that in that Red Bull, getting knocked out before Q3 5 times in a row is acceptable, because it's not. It's completely unacceptable in that car. It's a machine. It's a hell of a machine, that car. So I think Miami was I'm just thinking off the top of my head, I think maybe Christian Horner said similar recently, actually. So that's a scary thought if I'm on that wavelength. But I think Miami was at least the first kick, wasn't it? And then the qualifying after that and the struggles. But I mean, difficult qualifying, but I'm looking at his results on good old Wikipedia, which has also taken a bashing this year from Toto Wolff, but I love Wikipedia. It's got all the information there. But, those 5 in a row, 16th in Monaco, not good enough, but he finished 4th in Spain, 6th in Canada, 3rd in Austria, 6th at Silverstone, 3rd in Hungary, and 2nd in Belgium before the summer break. I know they weren't all qualifying exits, but he did recover well. So I sort of look at it and think, not almost what could have been, but it shows that Perez, and I think we've kind of always known this, on a Sunday is better than a Saturday. So if he'd have, a bit like Lance Stroll, got his Saturdays right, would things have been closer? I know this is all ifs and buts and all of that business, and it's the benefit of hindsight, but I don't think his races were that bad. And it's an obvious statement, but if he started higher up, there wouldn't be quite so many 6th and 4th place in there, would there? You'd have expected him in that car to be disappearing with Verstappen. Even if he still ended up 30 seconds behind, he'd still be 10, 15 seconds up the road from somebody else. If you get what I'm trying to get there. I know it's a pointless comment, really, because that didn't happen, did it? But you never know. It might do next year.
Yeah, I definitely think he would have been closer, and we would have had a season of a lot more sort of 1-2s, more like, and this is starting to go back quite a long way now, but the old Ferrari days of Schumacher and Barrichello tootling around at the front together. I think we might have been something a bit more like that. But I mean, I've been thinking about Perez, and he has had some shockers this year, despite having sort of better races. But I still think he firmly is within the margin where Red Bull want him. They want someone who's solid, can get those points in for the team, but not particularly challenge Max Verstappen and give them too much of a headache. I think the car this season flattered him quite a lot. I think that gave him a lot of leeway to keep his seat pretty safe. I think perhaps if this year had been more of a title challenge situation for Red Bull and Verstappen, and Perez wasn't there to back him up, get the points, lock up the podium to keep rival drivers away, I think perhaps at that point Red Bull would have started like shopping around, having a look, maybe looking back to like someone like Albon again to get to put him through hell or something. But I think this year he kind of sort of did what he needed to do, and maybe proved himself a bit by having those better races where he got himself back up onto or close to the podium.
Thank you, Handyman, for your super chat, by the way. I'll read it shortly. I've written it on my sheet for later when we do Q&A, but I'll definitely make some suggestions for you. But thank you very much for your super chat. If anyone chat has a suggestion, it says, since the season's over, we'll read it then. I'm looking for a great season to watch over the winter break. What's a banger season you suggest? Much love, F1 word. Thank you so much. 2012 is my first one off the bat, but we'll answer that probably later if we get an opportunity. But thank you for your super chat. Really appreciate your support. But on the other side of the garage, away from Sergio Perez, I know we probably should have started here, but I wanted to sort of talk the early possible championship fight. By the way, watching the Bahrain highlights back, I honestly I remember thinking that maybe all of that talk in the winter over sort of testing and that wasn't as bad as it was going to be, and that Charles Leclerc and Max Verstappen were going to go at it again, and it just didn't happen past about turn 1, did it? So, but it's nice to watch highlights back and have that moment of going, optimism. But yeah, Max Verstappen. Look, I've been doing race reactions all year, Stuart, and I have used just about every word possible to sum up his drive this season. He's just been absolutely spectacular, untouchable, sensational, brilliant, excellent, whatever you want to use. Magnificent is a great word as well, by the way. He's just no one's got anywhere near him, really. Yes, Sainz won in Singapore, and yes, there are a couple of races where, you know, McLaren were not a million miles away, and you thought, oh, could they do it? And the early races with Perez, somebody in chat was saying that Max wasn't really, fully with the car until after Baku, so maybe that's part of the reason in that. But he's just been, again, unstoppable all season, and 10 wins on the bounce to break that record. You've already mentioned the 1,000 laps in the lead, 575 points. I think that's the most in the season. 21 wins for the team, 19 for Max Verstappen. Bloody hell, 21 podiums. Only Singapore wasn't a podium. I mean, I think he's got the best. Is it the best win percentage? I'll have a look in a minute when you're responding, Stuart. But I think so many records have gone this year, and it's, like I say, if you're just watching the championship fight, this year's been incredibly dull. But behind it's been really interesting, and actually there's been a lot going on. So, but I think, and I know it's hard for some people, but I think this is something that people will look back on in a few years' time and go, wow, that was pretty special. Right now, people just want to tear strips off each other. It's the internet. But people will look back at this and say, that's special, amazing drive. Right now, they're just like, oh, boring. But I can't not appreciate what Red Bull have done this season and what Max Verstappen did. And that car is an absolute beast, as someone described it to me the other day. It's a rocket ship. It's incredible. But just like Lewis Hamilton at Mercedes, Michael Schumacher at Ferrari, Fernando Alonso at Renault, these drivers are on a completely different level to your Perez's, your Bottas's, your Barrichellos, your Trullis and your Fisichella's or whatever. So they have made the difference in that car. I just don't know. I don't know what to say. I don't know what to say about him. Just wow, I guess.
I mean, yeah, that kind of sums it up. And I think every now and again he'd remind you of just how strong the package of him and his car will be, and just how well they work together and how it does everything he wants it to do. When you'd have a little moment where he'd start to be chased by someone, normally in the early stage of races, maybe it'd be Lando Norris in that late year McLaren or Leclerc, or just someone would start to chase him and close up the gap to him, and he would just, over the next couple of laps, pull away to maybe 3 or 4 second gap and then keep it there. Like it was quite easy for him some of the time. He knew that car did exactly what it needed to do. And whenever someone even brought up the merest threat, he'd just pull away so they weren't in his DRS and just stay there. He didn't drive off into the distance a lot of the time. He just kind of kept the car where it needed to be so he could, not overdrive it, manage the tyres and keep it in the state that he needed to be in. It was, absolute domination. And clearly he's working really well with the team and the engineers of like getting that car exactly where he needs it to be. And I'm not saying, the car isn't suited to Perez at all, because I don't think that's the case. He is definitely on another level personally, but he's definitely helped to get it there. And you can tell that as well from the amount of feedback he gives during the race. He's often, I guess you could call it complaining or whatever, but he's often feeding back problems he's having with the car, even though he's could clearly pull a 0.8 of a second out on anyone else at any point about downshifts or understeer or how the tires fitting. You get this a lot from Hamilton as well, with when him complaining about the tires when he was also waltzing off into the distance. He's always feeding back and giving information.
Yeah, the downshifts thing was, I was going to say, was very much Verstappen's Bono, my tyres are gone, wasn't it? I've got downshift problems, fastest lap. Was kind of how it went. But do you think, and maybe this is there's going to be an obvious answer to this, but he says he doesn't care about records. I don't believe that any F1 driver doesn't truly care about records. I think they must do to a point. I mean, look at Abu Dhabi when he's saying pit Perez first, probably knowing that he's got that 1,000 record that he wants to go for. So he does care, of course he does. I mean, his win rate percentage for this year, by the way, 86.36%. That's ludicrous. That's absolutely... how dare he? I mean, the next highest is Ascari on 75%. Schumacher only did 72.22 in 2004, and that was such a dominant season. So yeah, ludicrous is the word to go for. But the question really, how much do you think Singapore stings? Do you think he's that bothered because the championship was basically done at that point, and he's still won 19 races in the end? Do you think maybe looking at, if he were watching this stream, for example, which he won't, but if he was, looking at my graphic and seeing that red Carlos Sainz there on the list, do you think that's bugging him, or Christian Horner? Do you think that's really making their bum twitch a little bit? Is the thing that's going to fall out of my mouth there for some reason? I'm going to say yes, because they want to win everything, don't they? That's the point of racing.
I think it's, looking back on the year as a stat and seeing that, I think it's more likely to bother people like Christian Horner, because that would have been an incredible thing to just have an absolute Red Bull whitewash across the season. Verstappen had already seeded a couple of races early on, so he was never going to get the full complement of wins. Um, he'd already beat the number of races in a row um, record, so I don't think he was okay. And I think it was, listening to him talk in Singapore as well when he turned up there, and it turned out that Red Bull just were not attuned to this circuit at all. I think he accepted it very early on. He knew where he was going to be and just cracked on with it, really. I think he got plenty of records this year that wasn't something to mind. If he'd done, if he'd got partway through, if he'd got, well, maybe not all the way to Singapore, but somewhere with winning every single race so far in the season, and then had a blot in his copybook, I think that would have bothered him, because I think that's when you start to think something special's on here. But I think he had plenty special going on anyway.
Yeah, what would it have been? Would it have been? Where's my list? I love stats like this. I'm so sad. Would it have been? So he'd done 10 in a row. So would it have been 18 in a row if he won Singapore? I mean, that's bonkers, isn't it? That's ridiculous.
That is absolutely mad. Yeah. Can you imagine? Yeah, I think he's fine with that. I think Christian Horner and the people in Red Bull might be a bit annoyed they couldn't quite do everything, and that was a really weird just off weekend for them, wasn't it? Considering how good they were everywhere else.
Yeah, that's a good point, actually, just on the bothering Red Bull a bit more, because obviously Perez had already won the 2, hadn't he, like you say? So it's not like Verstappen was going for 22 out of 22. So, I suppose probably, like I say, Christian Horner, maybe it annoys a little bit more than Max. I mean, Max is fine. He's got 19 wins, for goodness sake. I think, what was it, 33? Is that 33 then? 19 and 15 of his wins? No.
It's mad.
Something like that in his last 2 seasons. I mean, no, 34, wouldn't it? Yeah, so 34 wins in the last 2 seasons, and he's just launched up to 3rd place in the all-time win list out of nowhere. I mean, that's just unbelievable. So, I mean, look, massive congratulations to Max. I understand that there'll be some fans that aren't happy and think it was boring. I really appreciated it for what it was, and I always will. I enjoyed the season as a whole. I think it was a really good season, and I think he thoroughly, again, obvious statement alert, deserves the World Championship. But I hope that next year, I'd be perfectly happy to see him make it 4 in a row. I'd be very, very happy to see him make it 4 in a row. But I hope that an Alonso, a Hamilton, a Perez, or a Leclerc gets a little bit closer next year, or a Norris, Piastri. We have a proper fight towards. It doesn't need to go down to the wire, but just something that isn't over by Canada would be nice. That early in the season. Yeah. So that would be nice just to see that. So it's been a bit of a weird year as well, sort of as a content creator, because it's like, talking about around Qatar, when is the championship going to be won? And people are like, well, I mean, it's been won since about Miami, Sean. So what you're on about is you're sort of having to change your wording to wrapped up or finalised and things like that, because people get really pedantic about it. But never, I know. Let's move away from Red Bull. Obviously, we lost Imola. You've mentioned that early in the year because of the conditions there. Understandable at the time, but that's obviously more important things going on in Imola. But it did really annoy me that when you look at F1's list, they're still counting like race 7 or whatever as round 8, and it's like, no, we didn't race in Imola F1, stop it. But yeah, so hopefully that's all good, and I don't know what the situation is in the region, to be honest, but I hope that's all good and they can be back for next year, because I've said it a million times, I do love that track, one of my favourites. But I think the other big talk point for the first half of the year was Aston Martin in the early part, and then McLaren coming from almost nowhere. I mentioned it at the start when we were sort of summarising briefly, but it's Aston Martin I did not expect to see them come out of the traps like that with Fernando Alonso, 5 podiums from the opening 6 races, I think 6 from the opening 8 races, something like that. Massively competitive. I think I was pretty confident he was going to win a race, for goodness sake, this season. It didn't really happen. And it looked like Aston were absolutely cruising towards sort of second, third place in the constructors, and everything was looking great. And then McLaren, on the other hand, at the start of the season, were nowhere, to the point where I was talking about, the wind tunnel coming online in the summer. Maybe they will treat this as a transitional year and focus on next year. And then the upgrade comes in, was it Austria? They have a much better Austrian Grand Prix. And then suddenly at Silverstone, boom, there's Lando Norris taking the lead into turn 1. Oscar Piastri challenging down at Copse, was it, on the first lap? And McLaren, out of nowhere become this this most likely team to win a race apart from Red Bull this season all of a sudden. What a phenomenal turnaround. And I think a lot of credit goes to the team there, because it would have been easy for them to say, look, this hasn't worked. Let's look at next year. Wind tunnel coming online in June, July time. We can start to utilize that a bit. Put loads of effort on next year's car. Let's try again. But they didn't. They worked the backsides off. I think they did recognize the problem quite early, didn't they? And that probably helped them to be able to turn that around. I think if that's something that had gone on a few more weeks, a few more months, if you like, and sort of gone, oh, we still can't find a problem, maybe then they would have shifted focus. But it's a lot of credit to McLaren, and it's a shame that Aston Martin fell off as much as they did. But I still think I'd rather give the huge praise on the positive side to McLaren, to be honest.
Oh yeah, definitely, and no shade to Aston Martin either, who did an incredible job over the winter. I think the interesting thing about McLaren was, I remember Zach Brown saying they knew what was wrong with their car before they even went to testing. Like, they could see it in the wind tunnel, they could see it on the computer. They knew what their issues were, so they knew what they were having to deal with and build on that and develop that. Which is, if you compare that to like Mercedes last year, when they turned up in testing and then had no idea what was wrong with the car and they were just throwing everything at it and having a real mare of a season, really. They sort of got themselves kind of back on track by sort of the end. But McLaren kind of, they knew what they were dealing with. They made an upgrade plan and they had it sort of rolling out properly by Silverstone. And incredibly impressive, actually. McLaren before Silverstone were averaging 3.2 points a race, and after Silverstone, 18.2 points a race. They were the second highest point scorers from Silverstone onwards. Whereas like Aston Martin, what's my thing? They were doing 18 points a race before Silverstone and dropped down to 8 after that. So yeah, it
almost a
them
swap.
in particular is an interesting contrast. Yeah. Whereas most people has dropped off in the second half of the season from about a point to about a tenth of a point. Sort of, there were a lot of interesting little things like that. But yeah, McLaren, I think, absolutely incredible. And if they can get themselves off to a good start next year, I don't think they can make the same sort of proportional leap. But if they can start next year off sort of vaguely challenging Red Bull, Mercedes, Ferrari in the way that they are right now, they could have a really, really good year. Get at least a few wins in.
I know that Red Bull kind of gave up on this year's car. I think they said they haven't developed it since Singapore, but really, I think the general feeling is that post-summer break, they really didn't bother too much with it, and the focus has gone on next year. How much of that is because of the cost cap penalty they were facing, maybe just trying to maximise that and things like that. But they could be absolutely incredible again next year. But there's going to be a point, isn't there, if we're not there already, where that famous law of diminishing returns is going to kick in, and McLaren might not make the leap they made this year, but they might still make good significant jumps next year, because Red Bull can only make that car so fast, can't they? Which is exactly, I guess, the meaning of that phrase. But you know what I'm getting at, Stuart. You know what I'm like. But I think I'd like to see McLaren up there. I'd like to see Mercedes close. I'd like to see Ferrari closer. But I think there's a lot of positivity around McLaren, and I think for the right reasons as well. And that driver lineup, in terms of potential, not saying in terms of raw talent right now, but in terms of potential, probably the best on the grid, I would say. Looking at, I mean, Alex Alba's been fantastic. There's a lot of potential there, of course there is. But Lando Norris has been exceptional this year, particularly since the update. And Oscar Piastri, what a rookie season! I mean, unbelievable. I think most podiums in a rookie season since Hamilton in 2007, I think, is the stat. So absolutely in a McLaren, funnily enough. I think there's a lot of potential there in those two, and that lineup. I know McLaren have got them signed down a little bit longer, but I'd be getting the next contract ready already, just in case they continue to grow like they did this year. But there were a couple of moments between the two of them, weren't there? We saw quite a few team orders with Piastri sort of being asked to move over a few times. I don't know if Norris did a couple of times as well, but certainly Piastri, and he was happy to do that. And there was a bit of contact at Monza. So that's, not only has that got the potential to be a very exciting driver lineup for the future for McLaren, it could potentially be quite an exciting one for us fans to keep an eye on if things are going to get that close in the future, if they're fighting for championships or anything like that. And that's a little bit down the road. But yeah, McLaren this year, I just wrote McLaren update, transform the season. I mean, that's the summary there, isn't it? Really, it's never give up. Oh, look at me being all motivational. Never give up. Never give up. It doesn't matter how bad your car is at the start of the season. Always keep going. And they did. And like you said, was it testing? Did you say that they felt that was the car wasn't great? They kind of identified that. So I suppose the idea of treating this as a transitional year at that stage is a bit crazy, really, isn't it? So at least they could get cracked straight on with it. But do we know what I forgot to research it. I should have done. Somebody in chat might tell us. Do we know what the issue was with the car? Was it a balance thing? Was it we had brakes, didn't we, last year? That was the problem for them.
I don't know off the top of my head. I have forgotten. I think they spoke about it, but I can't know exactly what it was.
I'll see what.
Maybe chat will help you.
I'll see what chat says. I should have researched it. I've meant to do it. And I completely forgot because I was busy watching Zandvoort for a second time because it was quite an exciting race. But yeah, so and on Aston Martin, like I say, disappointed to see them fall away. But Fernando Alonso, I mean, come on, he's still got it, hasn't he? Definitely, 83 years old or whatever he is. Bless him, he's not that much older than me, and he's still fighting for podiums. I'm gutted he didn't get a win. I will be honest. I really felt like he had a chance. But on the other side of the garage as well, I made the joke earlier in the year that Lance Stroll drove better injured than he did for much of the season. When you look at his first half of the season, 6th, 4th, 7th from his opening 3 races, and then kind of fell away in the middle part of the season and kind of came back strong as well. Which I guess just on Lance Stroll, is that an update thing, do we think? Because they went back to they tried some things out, didn't they, around mid-season, and both the cars dropped off quite a bit, and even Alonso wasn't pulling out the results he was doing at the start of the season, but they were definitely more competitive once they'd switched back to an old spec. So maybe Stroll was affected by the new update. I'm trying to look at chat and wait for them to say is affected by lack of talent or something like that. But maybe the update there has been an issue for Stroll. But I think Fernando this season, just are we surprised? Did you? He's just a driver that doesn't seem to lose it, does he? He makes some dodgy career decisions, but he seems to have got this one right so far. And you can come back to this and clip it up next year when Aston Martin are ninth and he's been terrible all year. But I think he's been superb. I think one of the drivers of the season for me, at least.
Oh, 100%. And it's been a joy to kind of watch him kind of seeing, well, I was going to say old Fernando back, but kind of old Fernando, new Fernando. Like it's the best of Fernando we're seeing. And I actually think the way you describe Stroll's season with him kind of having this kind of drop off in performance in the middle of the year kind of speaks to the kind of driver Fernando is. He's in that kind of elite group of the Verstappens and the Hamiltons and the Schumacher, where he can drive around a problem. He knows what's wrong with his car and he knows how to kind of make the best of it and still get some performance out of it anyway, even when the car's dropping back relative to the rest of the field. So yeah, it's been a great year. I loved, especially at the beginning of the year when he had a really competitive car and he was duking out with the best, opening up the season with that fight with Hamilton and that move into turn 10, which
that's one of my overtakes of the season. That is
incredible. The bravery and skill to go on that. McLaren and Aston Martin and Mercedes were fighting quite a lot throughout the year. Something I kind of noticed when I was going back over the racing thing. They were sort of roughly on the same bit of track for quite a lot of the season, and it was quite fun watching people like Russell, Hamilton, Alonso sort of at each other. We saw some really, really good battles, and Alonso is one of those drivers who's very a hard fighter, but very rarely pushes it. You very rarely look at an Alonso move and think, well, you've just shoved him off the track or you've been a bit cheeky there. He's just quite intimidating and hard and places the car well, and he's just a kind of a joy to watch. And he's mellowed a little bit, and not in the way that he doesn't have the fighting spirit, but just kind of his attitude and kind of working with the team, especially in the early races. It was interesting to sort of see what he's like when he's got a good car and he knows that the team can work together to get some good results. And he'll play the team game and do what needs to be done. Whereas in places like Alpine and stuff, when things were going a bit wrong, he'd just sort of do what was best of Alonso and do his own sort of selfish thing. But it's kind of this year with Aston has kind of brought out the best of him, I think.
Yeah, I know exactly what you mean. When he, I think we said this before, when he had his, when he made his decision to go and retire, I think he said at the time, didn't he? He was quite grumpy with F1. He kind of had enough. I know he didn't have a competitive car, which didn't help. And then he's kind of come back, and I think someone just said in chat, is it Pervice says the sabbatical rekindled Alonso's competitive spirit. and maybe that's it. You know, gone off and done some other things. He did some other racing, and maybe a bit like Kimi Räikkönen when he went and did rally and kind of thought, you know, actually, I kind of miss F1 really. If Kimi ever said that, I don't know if he says a lot, bless him. But yeah, no, I didn't hate, in air quotes, hate Fernando Alonso. I wasn't his biggest fan, but since he's come back, I very much like him, and I kind of sometimes feel like I channel my inner Fernando Alonso when I'm at home. Not like racing to the kitchen or anything like that, but just some of the comments and things like that. And it's good to see him competitive. And it's good to see him smiling and being competitive. And I hope that Aston continue to move forward. And just on Lance Stroll again, just to reiterate, that was just a joke about the injured thing. It's not anything to get upset about. I'm not being nasty to him. You know, I'm a big Lance Stroll defender. He pays for my yacht, or his dad does. But my point was that when you look at those early season performances, that 6th place in Bahrain, yes, the car was fantastic, but he's driving in pain. He's still got damaged wrists, and he's struggling to, he's taking his hand off the wheel to give it a break. That's fantastic. You can't imagine it. I said it at the time. I know people where I used to work, I won't name names, who used to call in sick because they'd quite literally broken a nail. Oh, my finger hurts, I've got a headache, I can't come in. And you're like, all right, Lance Stroll's there with broken wrist driving an F1 car around Bahrain in that heat for 6th place. You think, that's incredible. So it's a shame he dropped off as much as he did, and it's a shame he didn't get a podium. But quickly then, what do we think of Lance Stroll's season? Looking at that, because I know Fernando, a bit like we said about Verstappen and Hamilton and co, a completely different level. But Stroll 74 points, Alonso 206, Alonso 8 podiums, Stroll none. It's whether your dad owns the team or not. That's not a great look, is it? Really?
No, and I mean, I'm glad, especially the beginning and the end of the season, we saw the flashes of the great Lance Stroll, because there is a good driver, and we've seen that quite a lot through his Formula career. And I think we've spoken before about how it doesn't help that he's in a team run by his dad, because it kind of takes the shine off him and just makes him seem like he's there for no reason. But no, there is a good driver in him. We don't see it consistently, and there were definitely times in the middle of this year where I did wonder, does he even want to be here? Does he now just feel like he has to drive for his dad? Like he just seemed a little bit miserable. And there was that, I can't remember which race it was, where he just got in a right strop at an interviewer after having a bad qualifying, I think, and that was really just sort of the low point of his season, where he just was having a miserable time. But I'm glad, we got to see the team revert to sort of a better spec car and him be able to fight again. And I'd like to see a more consistent Lance Stroll operating at that level. I don't think we're ever going to see Alonso levels from Lance Stroll, but if he's going to be in that car, which could be a decent car next year, a couple of years, there's a lot of investment going into that team and into a new factory and things. That team could be moving up the grid and staying there rather than sort of having this drop off. And it'd be good to see him fight for good positions throughout the year. Yeah,
I've always said he's a better driver than a lot of people will tell you, but I don't think he's going to go down as an all-time great, is he? Not by a long way, but I think he's okay as a driver, and he has got some speed in him. He can drive. It's like you say, it's not consistent enough, and I keep saying it. It's Sean's been banging this drum since 2017. It's just it's qualifying really hurts him, which we see him have contact, but if you're always starting in the middle of the pack or towards the back of the pack, your chance of contact is higher, isn't it? So he's going to be involved in more incidents and things like that. So sort your Saturdays out, Lance. I keep telling you, but he's not listening to me because he doesn't listen. But I do love, I've got to say, I do love the idea of, because there was that point, like you say, mid-season where I think the rumours were flying around that he wanted to go and start professional tennis. And people are like, oh, it's a great idea. Like he was going to be at Wimbledon this year or next year or something. But it's this, just the way you worded it, the idea of having to drive for his dad, this idea of him being woken up on a Sunday morning in bed and his dad's like, come on, time to go. Oh, Dad, I don't want to go. Just kicking his feet at the bottom of the bed and having a massive strop. I'm sure he's not, but he's got to want to do it. Otherwise, I'm pretty sure if he turned to his dad and said, I don't want to do it anymore, his dad would be like, oh, that's my out then. Go get a driver who doesn't want to be here. Yeah, look, he's here to stay. So I as I always say, I hope he improves and continues to improve, and closer to Alonso next season will be good. I don't actually think sort of by the mid-season point, his average gap to Alonso was that bad. I think it was, I forgot to check it. It was one of the things I put on my list of things to check, but I forgot. But I think it was only sort of, it sounds a lot, but sort of 3.5 tenths in qualifying sort of thing. So I mean, it's not, it kind of explains why Mike Crack was saying, I have to say it like that, because was saying, there's not the big gap that you all think there is between Alonso and Stroll. But again, the points table tells you a different story. And at the end of the day, points win prizes. Oh, I just said that. Oh, it's terrible. But it's true, isn't it? That the points are scored on a Sunday. So long as he always recovers from his bad Saturdays, it doesn't matter. But I don't know. I don't know how to talk about Lance Stroll, because what can you say? I think people have made their minds upon him, definitely. But the other thing before we get on to, we were supposed to divide this into two halves. We'll try our best to try and stick to that, but we end up, like I say. But the other thing about the first half of the season that we need to talk about is Nick de Vries. Dropped after 10 races. And I'm really, because obviously we've not really spoken about this, Stuart, so it'd be really interested to get your view on this. But dropped after 10 races. Did struggle for good chunks of those 10 races. Didn't really show enough improvement. I think what also counted against him was the fact, I think Helmut Marko said as much, was the fact he was 28. So although it was officially his rookie season, he wasn't really a rookie, was he, in the eyes of a lot of teams, because he was a Formula E world champion at that point. So he'd won other seasons as well. So my question marks really are: harsh, correct call, deserved longer. It divides people, because I think a lot of people I speak to, and people in chat say the same. It feels harsh to only give him 10 races, but when you look at what he's done in those 10 races, you can kind of understand why AlphaTauri and Red Bull made that decision, when you've got someone like Daniel Ricciardo, who they obviously really, really love at Red Bull and wanted to get him in that car. When you've got him waiting in the wings and you've got, a ready-made replacement, you can kind of understand why they made that decision.
Yeah, it's a tricky one, isn't it? And I've tended to be the first person to criticize the Red Bull whole junior driver thing, where they put people into seats, they don't do well immediately, they drop them, their whole career gets kind of sideswiped. The things they've kind of done to Albon and Gasly along the way that have kind of given them a really hard time and made it tough for them to kind of come back and fight. There's a lot of people in the wake of the Red Bull junior driver program, but it wasn't a great 10 races, was it? And he was quite clumsy in sort of racing with other drivers. He got into a lot of scrapes. He wasn't particularly fast. I mean, one thing about him in Formula E was that he would always be sort of elbows out and roughhousing people. He wasn't his fellow drivers would often complain about racing against him. So, stick him in the midfield and he's not going to make a lot of friends. So in a way, yeah, it was probably the right decision. And they've got, like you say, Ricciardo sitting, waiting in the wings, who could probably do a good job for them. It really kind of depends on what that team, which may be Racing Bulls next year from what I'm hearing,
what a terrible name,
supposed to be. If it is like a sort of nesting ground where you can hone the skills of your junior drivers, then you probably should give them a whole season. If it's not that important how many points you get, and what's important is developing young drivers to see where you can move them up to, then you probably should give them a full season. But if you're trying to run a successful Formula One team, then I think it's the right decision to move him out and get someone in who's got racing pedigree and who's going to bring in the points, or at least give you a good benchmark for where that car should be, and feed back on it.
I mean, when I put my Helmut Marko head on, which is a terrifying thing to do, by the way, don't do it. When I put that head on, I sort of think, that's the right call. But when I put my sort of bring the human side to it rather than just a sporting side to it, I do feel a little bit for de Vries, because he was under pressure from race one. The question marks were there from pretty much the start of the season, before he'd even turned a wheel in the car. So I do feel a little bit, again, from the human side, like he was fighting a losing battle. But from a sporting side, I can't disagree with the decision. But somebody's made the point in chat, and I actually say it in my AlphaTauri video, which will be out, or in the bottom 3 teams video, which will be out on Tuesday, I think. It would have been interesting to see what Nick would have done in the upgraded car, with the F1 experience of half a season behind him. Would things have improved? I mean, in theory, yes, because it's a better car. But if he'd have then struggled in that, then maybe the decision becomes easier to make. I don't know, but you've got Daniel Ricciardo waiting in the wings. You've got Liam Lawson, who did a fantastic job when he stepped in for Daniel Ricciardo. Yes, I'm full of bias. No, I don't care. But it's cutthroat, isn't it? And you've kind of touched on, the drivers like Albon that have been not shafted, but that have been hampered a little bit there, and Gasly being dropped. But then at the same time, whilst that doesn't look great from the outside looking in, they've also bought us Verstappen and Vettel and some fantastic drivers. And that's 7 world titles, drivers' world titles between those two alone. Carlos Sainz is another example, not of a world champion, of course, but of a driver that's come from Red Bull who's done very, very well. Daniel Ricciardo before his shift to McLaren, really, or that second season at McLaren. So they've brought talent through. So whilst it is quite a cutthroat business, it does work. It's just 20 seats in F1. Usually when a driver gets cut from AlphaTauri, then that's generally speaking it for them, isn't it? That's the problem.
Yeah, generally speaking, that's the way it goes. And often we're not shedding that many tears for a lot of people who've come and gone from AlphaTauri or Toro Rosso or whoever they're going to be next year. But yeah, I think sometimes it's just necessarily cutthroat because this is Formula One, isn't it? It's not Formula 3. It's not, by the time you get here, you probably should be able to fight for your own seat on your own terms. I think what really did it for De Vries in hindsight was just how good Liam Lawson was at just popping into that Red Bull. I know the car was better by that point, but just doing such a good job and really advertising himself strongly, I think. I'm sure Nick will find something to do with himself. He's one of the people that quite early on is part of this ongoing problem of the Formula 2 champion having nowhere to go. We're just having this big stack of people in the storeroom who've won Formula 2 and are waiting to do something. And I wonder if not being able to move straight into Formula 1 is having an effect on some of these drivers.
It's an interesting point, actually. Yeah, I mean, Porsche again this year. F2 champion won't be in Formula 1, will he? So I know winning the F2 title isn't like, in football, if you win the second tier, you move to the Premier League. It's not the same as that. It's a shame it couldn't be that the FIA couldn't have their own car or something, but then let's not open that can of worms. That'd be, someone gets a penalty, FIA car doesn't. Suspicious. But it would be nice to see these F2 drivers get a chance, but I don't like, just very quickly, seeing, a Porsche or a Piastri or a De Vries going from F2 champion to sitting on the sidelines. It's like next year with Liam Lawson. It's a bit frustrating to see him now having to sit and just... I know he'll do stuff in the simulator and he will work with the team and get to know the team, and that's going to be good for him. But the simulator, learning around the team, none of that is going to be actual on-track, proper, wheel-to-wheel racing. And he's missing out on that for a year, potentially, depending on how others get on within the team, of course, within the Red Bull hierarchy next season. But that's going to be the same with all the F2 champions, and I hate seeing them just stood on the sidelines and think, is there no way that they could maybe go somewhere else, or is there a way that... I was going to say, could you then maybe allow F2 champions to stay on, but then you're just moving the bottleneck, aren't you? That's all you're doing. You're not actually solving the problem. You're just... Because then people get stuck in F3 and don't get into F2, and there's got to be something that can be done to get these in other series, and especially with so many of these manufacturers and sponsors and teams having so many other interests out away from Formula One in things like, I think WEC is an example, IndyCar. Is there no way you can get them over there? Would be good to see, but we'll see what happens. Hopefully Porsche will get a chance at some point, and Vesti as well. But we'll talk about the driving market in a bit, because there is one bit of news on that later. But before we get to that, let's talk about the second half of the season. I know we've kind of mixed this up, but I'm trying to stick to... I'm thinking timestamps is what I'm doing here to break the stream up for people more than anything. But summer break, championship, pretty much done at that stage. Both championships pretty much done. We still had the question marks over, were McLaren just having some very lucky track-specific performances, or were they genuinely on form? Ferrari, where were they going to be? Mercedes, very up and down season. Not sure where the consistency was there. We'll talk about them in a second. But it was really Zandvoort, I've written here, was kind of the perfect return after the summer break, because it was absolute chaos. And whilst chaos doesn't necessarily mean it's a good race, because racing chaos, not necessarily the same thing, but it's always nice to have a bit of chaos from time to time, isn't it, a Grand Prix? And that's what we got in Zandvoort. And some spectacular driving on dry tyres on a sopping wet track after that first lap or two. I mean, that's amazing. We didn't see more people in the gravel, to be honest, in those first couple of laps. But really enjoyable return from the summer break, and it meant that we were waiting a little bit longer for those answers. Because yes, when you look at the results there, Verstappen obviously won the race. I think Lando Norris was only 7th, Carlos Sainz 5th, Perez 4th, Hamilton 6th. I think Alonso was 2nd, Pierre Gasly 3rd, for goodness sake. We were still asking the questions after that. Where are McLaren? Where are Mercedes? Where are Ferrari? And actually, after Zandvoort, it became clear that although McLaren was still a very big threat to Red Bull, Ferrari had they'd not been bad up to that point, but they kind of found their feet a bit more, and they were challenging. They had that fight in Italy where I think they were on pole and were running 1 and 2 at one stage, and then had that battle with Verstappen, and then Sainz's win in Singapore with that brilliant defensive drive and that great thinking to keep Norris within DRS. Ferrari kind of came out of nowhere, but I guess what I want to get at is that battle for sort of P2, P3, P4 in the standings, because I can't sum up Mercedes' season, for example, and I can't sum up Ferrari's season, because neither team seemed massively consistent. Mercedes one weekend were a threat to Red Bull. The next weekend, their 4th fastest. Ferrari were Ferrarying, as they always do, and they were kind of all over the place. And McLaren just seemed to be able to... They were a bit more consistent in that early stages after the summer break. What did Norris get? Quite a few podiums, actually, during that phase. So I don't know. I guess it's my point. I don't know how to sum up their seasons and what I think of Mercedes and Ferrari in particular, those two teams. We've talked a lot about McLaren and Aston Martin. I suppose that's what we'll talk about, Mercedes and Ferrari, really, and where you think they were over the course of the season in the second half of the year. But I am glad to see Sainz get a win, by the way, because I think he's had a pretty decent season. It didn't end well, but I think he's had a pretty decent season.
Yeah, he dropped quite a bit in the standings on the last race, which is a bit unfortunate for him. I think it doesn't necessarily speak to his entire season finishing 7th. Yeah, I mean, Ferrari did have a good second half of the season. It wasn't points-wise that different from the first half of the season, but they got a lot more podiums, and they seemed to be sort of ready for challenging for podiums a lot more. And I mean, they were kind of just like you say, just like McLaren, just ever present in a way they weren't before. They were sort of sharp some weekend and some not in the earlier weekend. And again, as with a lot of these teams, I think if we just see this kind of consistency throughout the whole year, then things will be a whole lot closer. But they still made errors. They still were doing the thing they did last year, where they were sort of didn't seem to have a proper strategy plan together, and were asking their drivers stuff mid-race or not feeding the right information through every now and again. We haven't quite tightened up that element of Ferrari.
Goal hanging for
for a few
cars.
years now. But I feel like when you hear Fred Vasseur talk, he seems quite level-headed and like he has a plan, and he's building that team into a more coherent unit. That's the kind of impression you get, and I don't know if that's just the kind of person he is, and he exudes that kind of energy. But I'd be expecting more of them next year, maybe a bit more of a tighter ship. But they will have the teams around them to fight with still. I think it's going to be a little while before we see top tier Ferrari that we used to see.
This isn't a Fred Vasseur car either, is it? He came quite late last year, so it'll be interesting to see how he does in the coming weeks and months, and how his changes over the course of this year with personnel will affect next year, and hopefully we'll get something better from Ferrari. But I mean, Dell made the point in chat. I stole his point, but we had a lot of waiting for a safety car from Ferrari at times, didn't we, this season? And one that kind of, I guess, from the first half of the season with Ferrari, that was kind of a hint at what we were going to get from Ferrari, which was telling Charles Leclerc to push between safety car lines in Jeddah after he'd gone past the safety car lines. It's kind of like, yeah, and he's like, you've got to tell me that sooner. That you're too late with that. Obviously, I think it was racing Hamilton in the pits. I think it was at the time. So you sort of thought, Ferrari, why'd you do this? But I think Vasseur did make changes to the strategy side of things, and I think we have seen at times this season an improvement. And actually, in the second half of the year, we did get a few times over the radio with Carlos Sainz, Charles Leclerc saying to the team, "Yes, I agree," which was nice to hear for a change. But it's frustrating sometimes to see Carlos Sainz and Charles Leclerc. Yes, as drivers, they do think about strategy, and they should think about strategy, but they shouldn't be making the calls when an engineer is supposed to have all of this information in front of them. And I said this last year, didn't we? It's all this information in front of them, the whole picture of the race. Then they're listening to the drivers dictate things, or the drivers are having to dictate things, and that gets frustrating. But it's also very Ferrari, and I say that as a Ferrari fan, so I can say that. So I agree on Fred Vasseur. He's quite funny as well, quite a funny man. So I hope that he brings a bit more of the Jean Todt to it than the Binotto, if you follow. A bit more of that, and I hope that he's a bit sterner as well, and can get that team turned around, because there's potentially a decent car there. We've seen it times this year. I mean, Vegas was, what a drive from Charles Leclerc there. That last minute move, he kind of, I hate this phrase, but we'll use it anyway, mugged off Sergio Perez a couple of times in that race out of nowhere, just threw it up the inside, and Perez kind of like, whoa, where have you come from? So I think there's the good bones of a car there, but I don't know how much of that they're going to tear up and start again next year, which I suppose Fred Vasseur's first year, maybe that's what they'll do. But I've really struggled with Ferrari this year. Same with Mercedes as well. Ruby's in chat. So Ruby might tell us how she feels about Mercedes season as a resident Lewis Hamilton Mercedes fan. It'd be good to get that view in there. But like I said, I feel like they've been one weekend really good, another weekend they've just not been anywhere, and it's got a little bit tetchy as well at times, hasn't it, over team radio, particularly with George Russell. He's got a little bit grumpy with the team from time to time, and of course we had the close calls in Japan, and then of course the crash in Qatar, which you thought, oh, is this going to boil over? But ultimately, then you've got a driver with Lewis Hamilton's experience coming out and saying, oh, I take responsibility for that, and that kind of calms it down, doesn't it? That settles that. So is it wrong that I kind of want those two to go head to head for the title sooner rather than later? Because I think that could get very spicy at some stage. I'd quite enjoy that one. But yeah, I think Russell got a bit tetchy at times this year, but he didn't have a great season, did George Russell. And Random in chat, that's his name, by the way, his username, Random, said that they think that Lewis Hamilton's season was a little bit underrated. I don't know what you think about that, Stuart. I mean, third place in the standings in a car that the team clearly were not happy with whatsoever, and looking at the results and the stats was, again, statistically worse than last year. That's a pretty bloody good job, actually, top three.
Yeah, when we got to the end of the season and you look at the standings and it says Lewis Hamilton third and it says Mercedes a second in the title, it kind of, it doesn't quite seem right to me. Like, my feel for their season, I felt like, they weren't awful. They were sort of consistently among it, sometimes fighting for podiums, often fighting for points. They were in and among it. But I just, they were never doing much particularly special. They had a pole, and they were sometimes sort of fighting up at the front, but it sort of felt they were kind of having a kind of middling season, and kind of interesting. They did end up getting second place and Lewis getting third, and maybe that speaks more to everyone else's kind of up and down-liness this season. And I think what Mercedes, even though their consistency wasn't there race to race, they didn't have this kind of ramp up or drop off in performance, sort of relative to, I guess, Red Bull, the benchmarks over the course of the season. They stayed pretty steady. The amount of points they got in the first half and the second half per race were on average about the same. What I did notice was, over the course of the season, both drivers seemed to lose pep. They got a lot more miserable or frustrated, and their interviews were a lot more downhearted. Like, they clearly maybe expected some development from the car, maybe expected to be able to sort of fight for more wins and poles and stuff towards the end of the season. It never quite came there. So they were always in that sort of middle of the points battle for most. I mean, Hamilton got 3 podiums in the second half of the race and 4 in the first half. So not a terrible season, but you could tell they were just fed up with it by the end. But it is interesting. Like, I saw a couple of memes of, I don't know what the meme template was, but essentially it was Lewis Hamilton dropping that car off into the sea at the end of the season. But that doesn't, again, that's the feeling you get from that car, but it doesn't jive with the fact they came second and he came third. That they were very much the best of the rest, and fought hard for it. But you look back at the season, you think, yeah, they didn't really have a good season. They're kind of quite miserable about it.
Yeah, that's what I thought, because I thought I was going to say something on the lines of it's strange to me they were so downbeat, having had such a good season compared to last year. But then when you actually go through the stats, it's nowhere near as good as last year. They have a lot more podiums, a lot more points, but ended up, was it third in the standings in 2022? So you sort of think, hang on a minute, Sean. No, they didn't. So you can kind of understand. You completely understand why they are frustrated with that. But I've got to read this because it's from Ruby, and it's superb, and it's given me a new nickname for them. And she can't get mad at me next year when I when I refer to them as this. But Ruby says Mercedes season was like a trip to Aldi. That's the German discount supermarket. Some weekends you find good stuff, sometimes you don't. It was not consistent. So from now on, they will be known as midline Mercedes for 2023. That's what I'm going to have to call them. So thank you, Ruby. That's made me giggle. Midline Mercedes is how we'll call their 2023. It's a good analogy. I like that one. I better change some slides to second half of the season. There we go. Yeah, so I think a lot of people are going to say consistency. Ruby said it there. You've said it. I've said it. That was the problem with Mercedes, but they've kind of abandoned that concept, if you want to call it that. They went with in 22, and I think they're moving something completely different next year, or very different at least. So we'll see what they can do with that one. But yeah, I think George Russell for me. I know difficult car, I get that, but I do feel like he had quite one of the disappointments of the season for me, George Russell. Again, I know difficult car, I know there were some frustrations in there, and there were moments as well, but he's a fair way off his teammate compared to last year. I mean, 175 for Russell, 234 for Hamilton. Hamilton got 8 podiums, was it, come the end of the season, something, or 7 or 8 podiums, and George Russell 2, and one of them came in Abu Dhabi. I don't know. Last year he was one of the standout drivers of the year for a lot of people. This year he's one of my most disappointing drivers of the year, and is that the car? Is it just circumstances? I think another thing with Mercedes, I suppose, and this could fit in quite nicely to the George Russell conversation. It also speaks to just how close that battle was between Ferrari, Mercedes, McLaren, and then sort of later in the season with Aston Martin in the second half of the year. The fact that you could have an average weekend, but you end up 9th, and a very good weekend, and you end up 2nd. It was so close between those teams that it just didn't make a lot of sense. It was just always fluctuating, wasn't it? So maybe that's part of why Russell is where he is. But is he one of your disappointments of the year, Stuart? Because last year was a really good season from him, for considering first season in that team, in what was a terrible car that I think Lewis Hamilton wanted to throw in a skip at the end of the year. I think it was him or Toto who said that.
One of the two. I think yes. I think he was a bit of a disappointment this year, and it was a number of factors. It wasn't all on his shoulders. He had things happen over the course of the season. I think because, I mean, people have had different opinions of George Russell over the past few years, but I was quite excited for him in his Williams years, and I was ready for him to move into a top team, which we knew was going to be Mercedes. So to see him do well in that first year there, even though the car was very troubled, what was quite exciting. It's always exciting when you see one of these young drivers moving up and you think, oh, this is going to be one of the people of the future, one of these next generation drivers that we're all waiting to see fight for wins and titles. And we know last year, he did beat Hamilton in points, but we know Hamilton was doing a lot of the sort of development work and taking on spec parts and things that weren't working, and sort of sacrificing races for that kind of thing to learn about the car. So that sort of went into the difference between the two of them. But this year it's kind of swung back the other way, and Hamilton's sort of been allowed to get on with it as best he can. And he does get very frustrated on the radio, which I think something he needs to get under control to an extent, and kind of learn how best to communicate with the team and his engineer during a race. He can be a little bit sarky, even when I think he's making points that would probably be quite useful, when he talks about trying to get the team to work together, or to get the fighting under control so they can move up through the field, or whatever it is he says. Sometimes he makes good points, but he sort of delivers it in a I guess some people find it annoying, but sarky or unhelpful way.
British.
Yeah, just like, and I think that drives a lot of people a bit mad and doesn't win him over. And again, I take this with a grain of salt, because it's the thing I say a lot. When you're amped up with adrenaline and driving at 200 miles an hour, you can't always just think about your tone. You just want to get your point across. But I think he probably would have learned a lot this year, and I'm hoping he can sort of take this into next year and hopefully with a better car and do something better, because uh, he's supposed to be the future of that team. Hamilton is, I feel like we've been saying this for about 5 years now, but at the sort of end of his career, and they're going to need someone to take on that team leader role and deliver every single weekend. So, for the sake of good racing, we hope that he can do that.
A couple of super chats. Thank you very much to James Rich. Says, won't be able to join you this afternoon. I'm afraid, good sir, as I'm at Christmas do for the little one. But it's been a blast tuning in this year. Keep up the great work. Love the channel. All the best. Thank you very much, James Rich. Your full name. You always get full name, don't you? For your super chat and your support this year. Hopefully see you next year. And Ruby says, Lewis qualifying wasn't great, but race pace and overtakes were impressive. He is the GOAT. But team was inconsistent. George annoyed me on the radio. I giggle there because Ruby always makes sure she gets that in there. In her super chats. Thank you very much, Ruby, for your support. And Dell says, George did have great radio moments, though. Sweat equals rain, and we were forecast a podium. Let's never forget that. Is it raining? No, it's just sweat. On the inside of his voice.
He was so alarmed.
So, yeah, thank you for your super chats. So we'll get back to Handyman's super chat if they're still here a little bit later, and we talk about seasons to watch over the winter. Inconsistent, up and down. I guess fundamentally the same thing in the conversation, in the context of Mercedes, and hopefully both Ferrari and Mercedes can get closer to Red Bull next year. Let's enjoy this, because it's not that far till the new season, but let's just take a moment to live in fantasy land. It'd be lovely to get into next season and have Red Bull, Mercedes, Ferrari, McLaren, Aston Martin all on an equal footing, and we have the most incredible season we've ever seen in our lives. But not realistic. In fact, a lot of the talk seems to be that Red Bull are going to rock up next year with a car that could be maybe not as dominant as this year, because that'd be bloody hard to do, but could be pretty impressive given they've been working on it for so long. So let's see what happens. Although I think it was yesterday. I read something yesterday about how the first upgrade package for 2024 could be a bit of a weak one for Red Bull because of the impact of the cost cap penalty. We'll see. But if they build a car that's 2 seconds a lap quicker, then it doesn't matter, does it? How they upgrade it for the rest of the season. So we've talked about, we're not going to do every team because I'm going to do those in the videos in the next few days. But I do want to take, so nothing on Alpine today, although I did enjoy the Gasly Ocon fight. That was a lot of fun, and well done to them for their podiums. I think Williams, the other team, I really want to talk about post-season a little bit, but just sort of looking at the second half of the year, is there anything talk about for the second half? Because the second half of the year, like I say, felt like a bit of a grind, didn't it? Just sort of, we've had a lot of races. We know the championships are done. We're still enjoying watching some racing, but it's sort of like, oh, is Abu Dhabi here yet? It's not that you want it to be over, or I didn't want it to be over, but I'm trying to explain it the best I can, but just like, oh, here we go again. But yeah, it all felt quite predictable at the front as it had done all season, but in behind, as much as the race was enjoyable, it's not over the big positions, is it, in the championship, really, if you follow what I'm saying. I don't know what I'm trying to say, but I just struggled with the second half of the season a little bit this year. So I was trying to think, pick out. I mean, Qatar, we could talk about Qatar is probably a good point, actually, to pick out, with Max winning the championship. Japan, of course, the constructors won by Red Bull there, but Max won the championship in Qatar in a sprint, which is interesting. So that's the first thing on Qatar. How did you feel about that? Because I said at the time that whilst I don't want to see championships decided on a Saturday, this year it didn't really bother me because the championship was done since like Canada, as I keep saying, or something like that. It's been done for a very long time, so it didn't have the impact of, like, if we had a sprint in Abu Dhabi and it was won, and it was a really close title fight and it was won on the Saturday, that'd be a very frustrating thing to see. Whereas in Qatar, it's kind of like, it doesn't really matter if he wins it on a Friday, a Saturday, or on a Wednesday afternoon, does it? It's done. So how did you feel about that? Was it disappointing to see it, or does it not really matter to you?
No, I was pretty fine with it. Again, like you say, he was so far ahead that it was a matter of just when's it going to happen and what's going to be, and be it, well, not every sprint, but for the most part, sprints, races and things, he does kind of just waltz off and do his own thing. So it's not like he's really fighting for the championship either in a particular race. And I'm not super bothered about races being won on a Saturday. I would like it to be won in kind of a battle. If there's like a close title fight and and it's the sprint that does it, but it's because someone does an overtake for the lead and stuff like that. I mean, that's fine by me. And with those kind of numbers, it's probably not going to be super close anyway, even if it's a sprint. So I'm fine with that. I would like maybe to see him win a championship like under normal circumstances at some point. Because last year I don't think he won. He didn't realize he wanted to lose in the cool down room because
no, he didn't,
one knew where the half points had been given. But I'd like him to win with a classic head to head, no controversial, everything just fine on race day. That would be quite nice. But I don't think he'll be complaining. And I didn't have a problem with it. I think it's a good idea not to have a sprint race in the final couple of races of a season, just to get rid of that possibility, so that if it does get win on a sprint, it's because the season's basically kind of already been decided.
Yeah. I think for a lot of people, you could have ended that sentence at, I don't want to see a sprint. I think a lot of people would be quite happy to have just ended that sentence there, to be honest. Let's not have a sprint. And that's that. Piastri's first win, of course, it's not. Oh, this is so frustrating. This is one of my big issues with the sprints. Piastri has won an F1 race, but it doesn't count. It's a sprint race. It doesn't count as a proper win. So Piastri did win the sprinting in Qatar, didn't he? With a fantastic. He led in Belgium as well during the sprint, didn't he? So
yeah.
What a season he's had. But just such a good talent is Piastri. But yeah, it doesn't bother me that it was done in the sprint. It just annoys me now that Piastri's got that win in the sprint, but it doesn't actually count apart from in the sprint table, which nobody really cares about at the moment. Again, prestige in the future, that will matter, but it doesn't really matter to many people. It matters to Piastri, of course it does. He's won in a Formula One car, whether it's a sprint or a race, he's still done it. So well done to him. And of course, Qatar, quite a controversial weekend anyway. Championship was done, and then we had that bloody, what was it, the mandated stint lengths on the tyres, because the FIA, who for the rest of the season, to be fair, really did make sure that tracks were up to standard. Vegas, but yeah, it's a bit frustrating that painting fake curbs on the track and changing profiles of corners mid-race weekend, and it's such a mess that was. And then the drivers' mandated stint lengths meant in those conditions they're pushing harder, and they were all absolutely jigging. I mean, you had, what do we have? Where are we? Where's the list? Esteban Ocon throwing up twice in the car. Sargeant had to retire with dehydration. Albon was taken to the medical centre. And that was, as I say, all issues caused by the FIA having to mandate stint lengths because of their cock-up. Really? Because that's what it was. I mean, it's baffling. And I know a lot of people, on the old Twitter, I prefer it when men. Whatever. But it's brutal. It's brutal to put the drivers through that. And I think they're now talking about cooling. Certain cooling things in hot conditions in the cars, and it's just the mandated stint lengths that was the issue there, and it was because the wrong tyres were there and because they messed about with help me, Stuart, please.
I'll start with a positive thing, which is that I'm glad they figured something out and we didn't get a USA Indianapolis 2005 situation where everything went wrong and most of the teams couldn't race. I'm glad they came to some kind of solution that meant we could have a race. But it was bad showing. It was bad planning, bad analysis of whatever you need to make sure tires could behave well at that track without braking and not foreseeing temperatures, whatever it is that you think this $1 billion organization could sort out. They didn't get on top of this early. I know they're moving the races later this year, so it should be a little bit cooler, and they're going to have aerodynamic elements to kind of help cool the drives and stuff. And hopefully the tires will be working next year, so we won't have that kind of problem. But it was a bit of a mess. And the only thing I think, in terms of athletes should be able to take the most grueling conditions and stuff like that. There is a certain extent to which I agree. You've opted in, if you were doing an Ironman run or whatever, or a endurance cycling race or whatever, that's if you want to push yourself to the extreme until you faint or throw up, that's kind of your own personal business. I think the only issue I have is because you're in a 300 kilometer an hour 1 ton racing car, I just don't think you can have people on the brink of fainting or throwing up in the car and not necessarily or having clear vision. I think that becomes a safety issue for other people outside of the one person who's opted to continue racing, because they are obviously going to continue racing. I think that's the safety issue, is that you can run into other drivers, you can have an accident that causes other people harm, or things like that. I think that's where the issue. I think maybe we can all agree on that's the problem. The same reason you don't want people falling asleep at the wheel anywhere.
Ideally, yeah. No, I think my issue with the whole men should be men thing, I mean, I don't like the phrase anyway, but it's too simplistic look at that situation, because you're not, like you say, you're driving a Formula One car, the heaviest they've ever been, or one of the heaviest they've ever been. They're massive things in that heat. And actually, to be fair to the drivers, kind of a little bit forced into that situation because the FIA had to mandate the stint length. They were having to push flat out for a full race, which, number one, can we do that anywhere where it's safe to do that, please? Because that's what Formula One should be to me, flat out all the time. But not the mandated stint length, just making them push all the time. But they do sign up to it, but then the FIA changed the track during the weekend, which isn't good for the drivers. And yes, they can adapt to it, and they did adapt to it. But then the conditions were hot, and I don't know. It's just too simplistic to be like, oh, they're wimps, which is what a lot of people seem to think. But it's like, yeah, it's easy for anybody to sit there and say. I mean, I could sit here and say anything you like about these drivers, but I wouldn't even fit in an F1 car, let alone be able to drive one. Do you know what I mean? So these people are incredible. So if you've got Alex Albon and Logan Sargeant and Esteban Ocon in that state when they get out of the cars, and the drivers looking absolutely exhausted and drained and pouring with sweat, then you can just say that must have been brutal, because if they're like that, it probably would have killed me. Do you know what I mean? So we've got to give a bit of slack on that one. So the other thing I wanted to talk about actually was from the second half of the season was Vegas, just on the subject of the FIA being the FIA. There are a couple of points to make on this. The first one really is that I think as an event, on the whole, sort of from the racing side of things, it was actually pretty good. And I don't know, was that a lot of the analysis seems to be that the cooler track temperatures, the cold track temperatures, really helped to keep that race nice and spicy. But also the track layout did offer up some overtaking opportunities. And I think that overall, the race itself, for whatever reason, whether it be the layout of the circuit, the cooler tyres, the fact the drivers were giving it more, I don't know. But whatever the reason, that race itself was so much better than I thought it was going to be. When I first saw the track layout announced, I was like, what the hell is that? Spider Pig? Why have we got a Spider Pig track? It's ridiculous. But it's actually pretty decent. But the weekend itself, and the reason I'm bringing it up is to sort of clarify a position, really. So somebody got in touch with me, and to that person, if you are listening, I'm not throwing any shade at you, I'm not being nasty or anything like that, but they said they were quite disappointed in me because they felt that I was being a European snob about Vegas, when that's not true at all. I've been a big defender of race in the US. I've always said if the US can sustain 3 F1 races and F1 can sustain three US races, then go for it. I think it's a big enough country to do that. So I'm not against that. My issue with the weekend was, number one, the situation with the circuit. That was not fit for purpose on Thursday morning. It was a weird weekend, wasn't it? Thursday morning. So it wasn't fit for purpose, but that's an FIA thing, not necessarily just down to those who put the track together. That's an FIA thing as well. And the fans were treated absolutely atrociously, which was an FOM issue, because it's Vegas aren't necessarily doing that. Again, that's F1. Yes, there are laws to follow, but that's F1 not giving refunds when they should do, etc., etc. But the other thing as well for me was that whilst I'm sure if you're at the track, the show was absolutely spectacular, that doesn't always translate on TV. If you go to I don't know, try to think of a band that isn't like 3 million years old, so I sound really hip, but I'm not able to. If you want to go watch
Taylor Swift,
that'll do. If you go to a Taylor Swift concert, you're going to have a much better time than if you're watching it on TV. And that was my point, really. So with all the stuff around it, all the cheese around it, that didn't translate well on TV, so I didn't enjoy that as much. So what I did was, as a grown-up, I chose not to watch it, the bits that I didn't want to watch. So I watched the racing and really, really enjoyed that one. But I was never dumping on the event as a whole. It was cheesy as hell. And there were times when, Toto Wolff in particular, and then we had a chat at the time, didn't we, Stuart, about it? But Toto Wolff, unbearably butt licking, whatever you want to say, that was frustrating, and some of the sticking to the party line around it was frustrating. But I wasn't attacking Vegas or the US with that, and it's not. And my point around the European snobbery when I said it was that while I'm absolutely sure there are some people out there who were being snobby about it, I don't think from what I saw, that was the overriding issue. The overriding issue was the track issue, the way the fans were treated, and the fact it was a bit cheesy. But if you don't enjoy the cheese, turn it off. And if you do enjoy the cheese, watch it. But that was my take. That was the point I was making. I've probably not even explained that very well. But I don't have an issue with racing in Vegas. It was great. And you know, if I don't know how you feel, Stuart, but if you were in Vegas for that event, you'd probably be front and center of all the excitement and the cheese, because that atmosphere would be amazing. Like, you know, I don't get too excited and start singing in the living room when I'm watching the British Grand Prix weekend and Sky are doing their things. But if I'm in the grandstand for the Sky thing, I'm singing along with them and I'm cheering. And, you know, I'm not sat on the sofa clapping and screaming when drivers go past, but you do it at a racetrack. So it's just that doesn't translate. So it's not an issue with Vegas overall hosting a race. It was just, I think the way that, and Ruby's just said in chat, even Toto annoyed them there. So it's like, it's more the way that F1 handled it rather than Vegas and the FIA, if that makes sense, rather than Vegas itself. That was the really short version of that 10-minute waffle there. Sorry.
Yeah, and I think they also, because I've been seeing a lot of things about how much they've been annoying the locals and the businesses and stuff for months, and I think it's been very disruptive. And hopefully that'll be something they can, once they get into the rhythm. Now they've done it once. Hopefully the putting it up and taking it down won't be a pain on businesses and tourists. I think it's been quite a lot for Vegas to take. And I think the other thing to mention is the kind of weird paradox they stuck themselves in by putting it on at a time that was good for almost nobody, apart from maybe the Australians and the East Asian people get a bone when they can have it in the afternoon for once on a Sunday afternoon. But considering this is part of this embracing the new burgeoning US audience, it was a late race even for Western US. It was a nightmare qualifying and race for the Eastern US, where I think a lot of the population live. And again, it was a very early start for us. It was an incredibly late start for, let's say, like New York, where I think it began at 1 a.m. I want to say. So you'd have to be watching from 1 till 3 in the morning, which is a really weird time to watch a race. Even us in Europe don't ever have to watch anything at that time. So it was, the timing was weird. I think, but I agree with you. The race was good. The track was good. I wasn't as worried about the track as some people. I think with a lot of street races recently, they've had a tendency to just try and throw 50 corners at it for some reason and just kind of wind it through. This was pretty simple. You had like long straight, overtaking points, some kind of interesting little corners. It kept it simple. Simple tracks can be fine and great. Look at Austria, for example. That's only got about 9 corners. It's got me optimistic for the future. I personally don't care at all for all the pomp and the ceremony and the kind of things I find a little bit cringe. Maybe some other people get a lot out of that. I find a lot of the sort of Miami and Vegas things a little bit cringe for my liking, but if they can put on a good race, I'll be there every year. I won't be there every year. The things cost $5,000 to go to.
When did you win the lottery?
I would like to see a bit more accessible for fans. I think they did a lot of kind of cow herding of people who are in the area, and it was very unlike Monaco. If you go into Monaco, they don't just pen you in and stop you from like looking out of your own balcony and stuff, or charge you a premium for just being able to glance a car out of your window. I think they need to loosen up a little bit to people who live or stay there, because I think they're putting a lot of pressure on the city, and the people in the city aren't getting a lot out of it while it's on. I think it's quite annoying. And if they at least can't just look at the cars, I think that's a little bit unfair.
Yeah, I mean, I suppose the only argument is Monaco charge a premium for everything anyway, don't they? So I suppose they can't really charge you much more of a premium on top of that. I mean, they could if they wanted to, I suppose. But just on the pomp and that around it, do you think, as someone who maybe that doesn't appeal to you, do you think though that, sort of back to my point, that if we were at the race, you'd enjoy it more than watching it on TV because you're kind of part of the atmosphere, if you know what I mean? Maybe not. It's fine if not.
I know. I think maybe so. I think there's a lot going on. They could cheer up the crowds. I'll tell you something that I am just reminded of, though. Do you remember the Dutch Grand Prix?
Which year?
And
every year,
just,
yeah.
this year they were just pumping beats into the crowd, and the entire like build up to it, everyone was dancing. There was music pumping over all the interviews. It was just like you could feel the atmosphere through the TV. It was quite amazing. I was sitting there with a big grin on my face, just They were really just geeing everything up, and they weren't doing it with, big announcers or whatever. They just had this like music going. You had shots of the crowd dancing and being like energized for the race. That was, I really enjoyed that. And if they can maybe get that across somehow to us in the build up to the race, either just through music or geeing up the crowds or just some kind of, direction, production. I'd like to be able to feel that kind of sense of build up that I felt in the Netherlands.
What Vegas did give me, Stuart, is one of my favourite off-track moments of the season. I can still see it. It's something whenever I feel a bit low, I just go and think about this moment. I'll go and find it. Was the announcer been like, Sergio Perez, right in his face, and Perez is like, what do I do now? And he's just stood there completely lost. I think that's one of my favourite moments of the year off track. It's just the look on his face, like, and now what? And he just looks completely lost. Sorry. Random
that
point.
Was amazing.
It was just so perfect
for that. And then the announcer just turns away from him as well. He's done.
Yeah, just completely ignored it. Like, yeah, you go now, mate. You go. And it's like, why has nobody briefed him? Or what? Oh, they probably have. Maybe Checo's just completely forgotten by the time he gets there. I don't know. Let's read a couple of your comments quickly then before, because I think we've been going an hour and a half. I knew this might be a bit longer because there's a lot to get through, but I think we'll sort of round up on the season in a minute and do driver of the season, and then we'll do the quick chat on a couple of the news things, and then take a couple of questions before we go. But one of the things I did like about Vegas was the lack of crowd shots because it was so dark, made TV coverage better, says Black Hawk. So I'm still certain, by the way, and I think I asked you this actually last year, Stuart, but I'm still certain that at some races, if not all of them, either the crowd audio is enhanced somehow or something's being piped over, because the amount of times you'll look at the grandstand and there's this massive cheer and then they'll all just be sat there unmoved. And you're like, maybe they've got microphones somewhere where they are cheering and screaming. I don't know, but it doesn't always feel totally authentic. A bit like what are these called? Canned laughter in sitcoms. Feels a little bit like that sometimes. I don't know, is canned laughter a thing? Have I made that up?
No, that's fine.
It's just sounded weird in like canned laughter. Like get that from the supermarket, get it from the middle aisle, Mercedes. Also, by the way, and I know we've agreed on this, Stuart, the other thing I want to take from this season when watching the highlights back on F1 TV is just how much better Alex Jakes is than Crofty. But also, one thing I can't bear is David Coulthard shouting "contact" every 3 minutes. It's a little bit annoying.
Yes.
So not everything's contact, DC. Just calm down, mate. Toto saying drain covers has happened before, as if it's somehow a defence was utterly insane. Says Jonty. I said that, Jonty. I think we had the conversation, didn't we? And I said it, Stuart. I said it on a stream as well, that just because those drain covers had happened in Baku and Monaco before, and I think Sepang as well, doesn't mean that's an excuse. That means you should be doing everything to make sure that never happens again. That's the frustrating thing. So, yeah, the Vegas race was much better than expected. We actually had changes for the lead, says Mechanized Chaos. That's true. That was a great fight for the lead. And like I said, that battle between Leclerc and Perez. Of course, Perez as well. That's the other one to the line in Brazil with Alonso. What a moment. That's if you want to know if Fernando Alonso still got it, that was it, wasn't it? Letting him go, not letting him go, but Perez getting through, getting the DRS, getting him back, and then just taking the right lines to fend him off to the line. That was a great finish to the race. Absolutely was. I thought Lewis's purple Barney suits he designed were actually quite fashionable, says Daniel Yu. Didn't see those ones. Not sure what you're on about there, but yeah, I'll take your word for that one. I'm not, I'm in joggers and a t-shirt. I don't really do fashion and my geeky new reading specs, which are giving me a headache. Do you know what? Reading glasses and whatnot, they're so hard to get used to. They do keep giving me a headache, but I assume that's just a normal. Look at me, like it's turned into a doctor's appointment, or whatever. Is this normal? Well, you get used to them. I suppose it is, isn't it? I can see things, which is nice. I can read things.
That seems useful. Yeah.
It's perfect for reading glasses, I suppose. Otherwise, it'd be a waste of money, wouldn't they? The 2005 season review on YouTube is a great watch, says Clay. Logan's upturning form, says Fodge. Yeah, let's have a little word on Williams quickly then, Stuart, actually, and what was a very good season for them, I think. Although going through the stats, it's not a million miles away from last year in terms of some of their results, but in terms of the points at the end of the season, 28 points for them. It kind of feels like, yeah, we'll do this because then we can lead into the news as well about Logan Sargeant. But Alex Albon, bloody fantastic this year again. He's proven me wrong massively. I say that in a video that's going out on Thursday, I think it'll be. He's done such a good job of that team. He's leading it so well. Really consistent, some really great results, some really good qualifying performances as well. And James Vowles too has grabbed that team by the scruff of the neck and is doing some flipping good stuff there. And I think the future is very bright for that team. And Logan Sargeant, difficult, I was going to say first half of the year, but difficult most of the year, could we argue? But there was, maybe it's just me, and I've already recorded the video on Thursday, so I'm not changing it now, but it felt like there was improvement there. I know there were still mistakes at the end of the season and sloppy races, places like, I think Japan and Qatar, was he double DNF or something like that? So it wasn't perfect or anything crazy like that, but it did feel like he was improving and just starting to find his feet, which I wonder if that's why, leading into the news part, Williams have decided to give him that extra year, among other reasons, I'm sure. But I wasn't blown away with the improvement, but there was definitely something there. And they've obviously seen that. They've got more data than us, of course.
Yeah, I would say he was disappointing, not a complete write-off. It was really hard to get a feel on him. He did seem to be struggling quite a lot, and I think perhaps he was sort of shielded a little bit by Nick de Vries having a bit of a worse time, a bit of a more conspicuously worse time of things. I think he definitely will need to improve next year to stick around. And as we know, there's a lot of people waiting in the wings for an F1 drive. If I was that Williams team, I don't know if I would have kept him on, but clearly they have information that we don't see, and they have a relationship with him that we don't know. And if they feel like he's able to improve and that his year wasn't that bad, I think, yeah, it's fair enough to keep him on. Again, bringing in someone young and new, it comes with its own risks. So if they know where Logan's at and where they can move him to and set some goals for him, then I think it's fair enough to keep him around. But again, there's limits with that. So we'll see how he gets on.
That's the thing, is if you bring in a Frederick Vesti, for example, he might get in that car and be as disappointing as Logan was this year. And then Williams have wasted another year, whereas they could just stick with Logan and see if he improves next year. Bearing in mind they've invested money in him with his junior career, but also next year, and I keep banging this drum, there are a lot of drivers up for grabs next year who are out of contract. So Williams sticking with Sargeant for another year and seeing how he gets on with the driver market potentially being so volatile next year, they could snap themselves a bit of a bargain. You know, there might be I keep saying this as an example, but he might not want to go there. But if Williams are on the up and Sergio Perez becomes available, you know, could they go and land him? He brings sponsorship money as well, so that could be a good thing. And you know, there might be a better deal to be done with a Vesti or a Drugovic or a Porsche or something like that if needs be. So there's a lot of talent up for grabs next year. So I think I've always felt like they would keep him for those reasons. But I think if you base it solely on his season as a whole, I wouldn't. But based on the reasons I just said, I absolutely would, because it just makes sense in a weird way to me that they've done that. But it's not a great surprise. It is, though, just to clarify my stat from last week, it is the first time ever that we're going from the last race of a season to the first race of the next season with no driver changes.
I didn't realize it was ever. I thought it was since some point. Wow.
I believe it's ever. I can't double check now. I'll have to go back and count seasons. But from my terrible counting and working out, I think it's ever. Certainly in modern times, we'll say that. But yeah.
If AlphaTauri hadn't done some driver fiddling in the middle of the season, it could have been a whole season to the whole next season without a change.
A lot of driver fiddling. That, which I think sounds worse than it's supposed to do. But you've got Nick de Vries gets dropped, and then Daniel Ricciardo comes in, and then he gets injured, of course, in Zandvoort, and then Liam Lawson comes in, does a splendid job, and then they're back to Ricciardo again, and there's still question marks over next year about what they're doing. By the way, the Racing Bull's name is dreadful, and that's my final say on that. I don't like it. It's when they said, "Oh, we were looking for a generic name," and I'm like, "Well, no, shit." Other thing as well, quickly, before we take some questions, 2024 sprints. I wanted to ask you about this, Stuart. This is really a question from me to you. It's China, Miami, Austria, Austin, Brazil, and Qatar, reportedly, rumoured. Does China sound a bit bonkers to you, given that we've not been there since 2019 and they're willing to, with the changed format, go from a potential 3 practice sessions to 1, which could be disruptive from accidents or red flags or whatever, into sprint qualifying, sprint race, normal qualifying, then the race. You'd think of all the races next season that need 3 practice sessions, it'd be China.
I mean, I always take China with a bit of an asterisk these days. Are we actually going back to China this time?
Apparently
for real?
Yeah, apparently.
Because I thought it was just like a little bit of a routine we go through. We put it on the calendar and then we take it off just before the season starts. I thought that was, wow, we're actually going back. I'm quite looking forward to that then. Yeah, that is a weird one, but I guess it'll spice things up again. I hope the track is still in decent condition and stuff. And that could be interesting. Still quite early on in the season, right? Because they're sort of knocking it next to Japan, aren't they? Because they moved Japan right up to the beginning. Which would be weird.
Well, the whole of the start of next season is... Let me find it. The calendar. It's here somewhere. I do save these things and then I lose them within about 3 minutes. So it's quite a bit of a weird start to season. So you've got Bahrain on Saturday, the 2nd of March. And then you've got Saudi Arabia on Saturday, the 9th of March. So their practice sessions are on the Thursday. Qualifying Friday, races on Saturday. So that's all going to feel weird. For me... For me, Australia on my birthday is always weird. So that could be a laugh. But then you've got Japan as the 4th race. And then you've got, is it a couple of weeks then China, and then a couple of weeks then Miami. Then we come into Europe and we've got the European leg. And then, of course, we do the usual fly out to Canada and come back again because nobody seems to be able to make Miami and Canada work as a double header, but whatever. I'm sure there are reasons for it, contracts and climate and things like that. And then when you sort of go through the rest of the season, we've got this really bizarre gap between Singapore and Austin. Singapore 22nd of September, the US Grand Prix on the 20th of October, a month. And no one's explained that. I don't know if that's a logistical thing or they want to give them a break before what will be an intense final, 6 races with I think there's a couple of 2 triple headers there. Maybe.
They make it more intense by shoving them all closer together and going into December. It's very strange. Another little break. Yeah, that is weird. I'm looking at it now as well. Yeah, that'll be different. Sprint. The one that sticks out on sprints to me is Miami because you said Miami.
The race have been so good. So why not have a sprint there, eh?
Yeah, it seems like they always spoke about that. We don't want to stick a sprint in a place where the racing isn't exciting, and I'm like, that's a weird thing. But I guess they're still trying to zhuzh up the general vibe of Miami. Maybe they don't want 3 practice sessions in Miami because that's even more dull.
Yeah. So they could put a higher price on the tickets, though, can't they? As well, I suppose. So,
yeah. I remain ambivalent on sprints. I think they're quite interesting to watch. I think if what I'm hearing next year, or they'll move the sprint qualifying onto the Friday and then have the race and then have normal qualifying, I think that probably makes more sense in terms of flow. Because otherwise, we sort of have this Saturday that's kind of completely removed from the whole race weekend. It's like we take a day off from normal proceedings to do something unrelated and then back to it on Sunday. But yeah, I'm quite ambivalent. I mean, I quite like having a little race instead of a practice session. I'm okay with that.
I've always said this. It's having practice Friday morning, sprint qualifying Friday afternoon, sprint race Saturday morning, Grand Prix qualifying Saturday afternoon, race on Sunday. The whole weekend just flows. It builds to that crescendo of the main event so much better than stop, start, stop, start. And I think actually, I think motorsport.com reported it, that apparently the whole Parc Ferme thing, Parc Ferme will still stay open until the start of qualifying on Saturday afternoon. So they will be able to make changes to FP1 sprint qualifying and the sprint race to their setups and all of that business. So I think to try and combat some of what we saw in Austin, for example. But yeah, I mean, Miami might be great. It's got to be difficult to pick races where you're trying to find places where the racing should be good, because the Austin sprint this year was diabolical outside the first 2 laps as far as I'm concerned. It was a bit of a yawn fest, but yet that's actually a track that tends to be pretty good for racing. So thank you to Rixis as well for your super chat. Says only Jonty is missing in this chat. Chamber, glad to hear you. Sean, keep up the good work. We'll listen to full chat later. You both are... What are you both looking forward to most next year? Hope to see these chats. Thank you so much for your super chat there, Rixis. So that feels like a good point to go to a quick Q&A, because we've been going for quite a while now. So I thought we would be for the season. But just while they get some questions in, Stuart, how would you summarise this season without putting you on the spot too much? And who is your driver of the season. I've not made a big deal of driver of the season this year because I think a lot of people are going to agree.
I think it's been like a straight. It's been a more interesting season than it kind of looks at when you look at just the summary table. There were a lot of interesting storylines going on. I think this season, more than anything, it's been one of those development race seasons. Again, ignoring a lot of this, you have to ignore Red Bull. And I've been enjoying sort of seeing that back and forth between teams and seeing these kind of rivalries emerge, even if they're only fighting for lower positions. Yeah, it's been interesting, and we've been able to see certain people shine that we want to see. So I think it's been a one of those seasons that's it's a good season. You just kind of have to ignore the very front of it to see it. Driver I was thinking about driver of the season, and it was kind of between two. Well, okay, you can say Verstappen. I think Verstappen has had an amazing year. Obviously, the only reason I wouldn't go for Verstappen is I think, kind of as I alluded to earlier, it was almost too easy for him. He didn't really have to fight for it. He was in the lead. If anyone challenged him, he'd just push out a little bit more and just hold steady. He wasn't fighting for his championship in the way he was a couple of years ago. So I'm taking him off the table for that reason. I think possibly someone like Albon, who I think put up a real good fight basically every weekend, really showed his credentials. I think like a big neon sign over his head this year, being like, "Look how good I am! I could be in a better team. I could." Yeah, I think that was really great, and I think Piastri also had a great year. But I'm probably going to give it to Albon. I think I was noticing him a lot this year, and only in good ways.
Yeah, let me know in chat. Your driver of the season doesn't have to be one to keep everyone happy. You can give. I know Ruby says Lewis was their driver of the season. It would accept Piastri though, which is fair enough. So yeah, doesn't have to be the best driver or anything like that. Your driver of the season, that's the key. I have to keep reiterating that point. Everyone's gonna have different views. For me, it is Verstappen because look at the season results. That hard with it. Yeah, there you go. I get your point that he's not had to fight for it, but at the same time, I feel that's on everybody else. He's just been it's so frustrating to say this, but almost perfect across a 22 race season, breaking the records he broke, regardless of what the car's doing, regardless of his teammate or whether it's challenge. For me, that just is phenomenal. To keep that concentration in the second half of the year as well, you wrap up the title and still to win every race after that is maybe not surprising because they're Formula One drivers. They want to win races, don't they? That's why they're there. But and they want to win everything. But to keep that motivation and that desire and that hunger, and you can hear him on the radio wanting to make sure the strategy's right and the car's right and get these wins. That's impressive to me. But I think away from Verstappen, Piastri's a great shout. Obviously, Liam the legend Lawson. Fernando, phenomenal season. Lewis Hamilton as well, really solid. So sorry, Stuart, I kept talking there. I'll let you.
No. I mean, I fully agree with what you're saying. I think maybe I'd have given it to Verstappen if he hadn't briefly driven over the grass at the penultimate corner in Australia.
Oh yeah, I've changed my mind.
Yeah,
what an idiot. God, terrible season.
So that's why Albon edges it for me. And I don't think anyone can disagree that Piastri had an incredible year, and just love seeing Alonso back in the mix. I agree. These are all great shouts. Interestingly, I don't think either, and people might disagree with this. I don't think either Ferrari driver put themselves in contention for driver of the year. I don't think they did. I think they were inconsistent and a bit troubled. I mean, they did some great drives. Don't get me wrong. I don't think they were like, 100%. You can say they had their best seasons.
I think you said this earlier, really, but Carlos Sainz had a better season than the final standings show, and I think he had a better season than a lot of people give him credit for. But I think you're right. Charles Leclerc, I mean, he got no luck either, did he, to be fair? And then he's getting these pole positions, but then he's got Max Verstappen right behind him, and that's only ever going to go one way. So I think both of them did. I think Carlos Sainz did better than people are giving credit for. I think Charles Leclerc had the bad luck in the team this year most. Although Sainz didn't get it all his own way, did he? He had his problems as well. But I think when you look at what Max Verstappen did, you look at what Lewis Hamilton did in that. I'm looking at the championship table. Lewis Hamilton did in that that car up and down all season. You look at what Fernando Alonso did. You look at Piastri in his debut. Even Lando Norris, once that car was upgraded as well. You know, it's very difficult to look at Leclerc and Sainz and go, whoa, they were one of the best out there this season. I have no doubt in terms of talent, they probably are one of the best. There's many great drivers out there, but I don't think I can put them in the argument for driver of the season as much as I'd love to.
Still a big shout out for Sainz's win, in which he,
of course,
not only got the win, but like had a very smart control of that win by keeping Norris in DRS so that Mercedes couldn't just fly through. That was like using your speed and your head. That was very well executed. I thought that was brilliant. Yeah,
just have a look at some of these in the chat. John McGlade says Hamilton. Warden agrees, says Albon has been consistently good and gave me the good feels to see Williams not rubbish. He used a different word. Ayinka said Alonso. Random says Piastri. Dave says Alonso. Brad's gone with Lawson. Michael says Russell. Klein says love Max, but Alonso was insane. Mechanized Chaos does actually say Sainz for getting the sole non-Red Bull win. There you go. Jonty says Alex Palou, because I did it again. I did this last year. I didn't say F1 driver, so technically I'll let him off that one. Let's have a look. Yeah. Momo says Max, Palou, Vesti, and Stoffel. Stoffel's always the right answer, of course. And Ruby says, interestingly, no one says Lando. I mentioned him there just for particularly... but I think my problem with Lando Norris this season, sounds like I hate the guy, doesn't it? My issue with him, it's just there are a few occasions where he had the opportunity for pole and he made mistakes to throw that away. And if you're a Lando Norris fan and you now hate me for saying that, go and read what he said, because that's pretty much exactly what he said this season. There were moments where he had an opportunity for pole and he made a mistake and it cost him. So I think he had a good season, a very good season, particularly when that car got upgraded, but I don't put him up there with some of those that I've mentioned. So I'm pretty confident he'll be a world champion one day, though, if he gets the right car, that's for sure. So let's do some questions then. If anyone's disappearing, by the way, who might be back for videos, the first end of season waffle will be out Tuesday. That will be Haas, AlphaTauri, and Alfa Romeo. Oh boy, was that a tough video to write and make. What do you say about Haas? I mean, come on. And Alfa Romeo, like, they were there. That was great. And then the second one will be out on Thursday, 4 p.m. GMT. We are now, aren't we? GMT. And that'll be Williams and Alpine. And then it'll be every Thursday through December at 4 p.m. until the last one on the 28th of December. That's what's coming up. So there we go. Just to let you know, for those who may have been wondering, or none of you. Let me just get these super chats. So the first one we had was from... Handyman, who wanted to ask or wanted to know of a season that we would recommend for them to watch over the winter. I said 2012, Stuart. I think if you've watched the Brawn documentary, it's probably worth giving 2009 a watch as well. Have you got a year you'd pick?
Well, I'm looking forward to that Brawn documentary. Jensen really loves milking that year for all it's worth.
He does.
I think someone earlier also said 2005, which I think was a good year. 2005, 2003 are also fun years with a lot of people sort of involved in things. So yeah, maybe 2003. That was a fun one. I love 2003.
Yeah, I think that's quite I don't think that's mentioned enough when we talk about great seasons of the 21st century. 2012 gets thrown in there, 2010, of course, 2009. But I agree. I think 2003 was even as a Schumacher fan, it was a struggle that season because it was a fight, but it was still a good season. I know there are reasons behind the scenes. Was it tyres was a big issue in 2003?
Yeah, the tyre war was a big factor. Remember the old tyre war? That was fun. And then there was a bit of a controversial changing of tyre regulations towards the end. It was interesting. And I'm a big fan of Montoya versus Schumacher. That was always good fun.
Rixis says, what are you both looking forward to the most next year? I think partly seeing where Red Bull are and can they maintain this, but also seeing honestly what Mercedes, Ferrari, great, but what McLaren and Aston do next year is quite exciting for me, because they've both had kind of opposite seasons, like we said earlier, but both had overall very, very good seasons and made big steps forward. what does that mean for next year? If you've got Ferrari, you'd expect to take a step, and Mercedes take a step, and Red Bull get a little bit quicker or whatever. Maybe the gap comes down. But where are they going to slot in? I'm quite looking forward to seeing that next year. And I am quite excited for the return of the race at China. I'm not a big fan of that track. I know that's a controversial statement. I've been told before that a lot of people love that track. I'm not a massive fan of it, but I'm looking forward to seeing that back. And I might do a video. Spoiler alert. I might do a video on all the changes since 2009 versus now. You know, when you look at the grid, you go back to XPB Images and you sort of search 2009 China start, and you've got these yellow Renaults there, and you've got Hulkenberg in a Renault, and you've got the two Mercedes on the front row with Hamilton and Bottas, and he's like, what on earth is going on? It just feels like a million years ago. So much has happened in the last 4 years or whatever, and it just feels like a million years ago. So I'm quite weirdly looking forward to that as well, and I'm also really looking forward to watching Jonty lose his mind on Twitter every time the FIA make a shockingly bad decision. So every weekend.
Yeah. I mean, I'm hoping they get their act together, the FIA. I've got a lot of things on my list of things they should be adding to the regulations next year, which we won't go through. Yeah, I mean, you kind of nailed what I was mainly thinking about. I was thinking about McLaren and Aston Martin. They've definitely seeded the idea that they have the potential to kind of be up there and take the challenge right to the front. Whether they can do it year on year, because we've seen a lot of teams. We saw it during the Mercedes domination era as well. A lot of teams look like they're about to break in and take it to Mercedes and then kind of drop off again the next year. I think Ferrari in particular were one of those. But I'm hoping we can get some consistency year on year. And I want to see who can bring it, who can challenge Max. And we're in this kind of time period now where it's time for all these who were young, exciting drivers to like step up and be our championship protagonists. We want to see our Leclercs and our Norrises and maybe our Russells and old junior driver Alonso coming through and and sort of really kickstarting this era that Verstappen has started.
Yeah, somebody just asked in chat, what do we do for next year? Yinka says, what do we do for next year is dominant too. My response to that is buckle up, strap in, because it's going to be a long one. I think what I will always say about Formula One, and I don't mean this in like a really condescending way. I really don't, because that's not me. I know I have my moments, but it's not me. But I've kind of learned this over the years. Sometimes you have to pick your battles. And if you've got a season like this year where a Red Bull, or 2004 where Ferrari are dominating, as a Schumacher fan it was amazing, or when Hamilton's dominating, whoever, you have to go looking for your scraps sometimes. And this year, behind that, as we've said a few times now, it has been really good. And I would hope that if Red Bull rock up next year and they are absolutely dominant again, that we're still going to have that great fight between Mercedes, Ferrari, McLaren, Aston Martin in there. So pick your battles sometimes with F1 is what I would say. Do let me know if you've got any questions, by the way, in chat. If you've got anything you want us to talk about from the season, please do get them in. We'll be wrapping up in a few minutes, so it'd be good to get some in. Possibly the last stream of the year. I've got a busy few weeks coming up, getting those videos done for you all. But then there's also I go away for Christmas with to be with family on the 21st, and then I've got to get these videos made, and I've got Christmas shopping trips with people booked and days out and all. It's good busy. It's basically, hi family, I've not seen you all year, let's get all this sorted now because I won't see you next year. So it's a bit of a busy December coming up. Lyle, thank you very much for your super chat. Says, can Oscar Piastri win a real race next year? I'll let you have that one, Stuart. I suppose the Sarky answer is, of course he can. Will he? Do we think? I think the talent's there, isn't it? He's definitely got the potential.
Yeah, I think he's definitely ready to win a race. He's going to need, the car beneath him and stuff to put together. But I think he's definitely got the pace and the skill and the smart head to put a race win together if he's given the car beneath him to do it. I feel like, and I know I say this having him beat Lando to a sprint race technically. It feels like Lando's more ready than he is, so he'd probably be more likely to take it before Oscar. But as we sort of discussed, Lando can sometimes make errors in critical moments when he's on the brink of something special, and that's something he needs to iron out. So yeah, I think definitely he can win, but obviously a little bit dependent on the car and the state of play of the field.
Is it Blau? Says Blau Kit says talk about the quality of the live broadcast this year. It was a big issue in my opinion. What's your opinion? I think we've talked about this a few times over the last few years. It does feel like some weekends the TV direction is horrifically bad. Cutting to the crowd when there's an overtake happening, or cutting away from an overtake because somebody's coming in the pits, or because somebody's slightly wide at a corner. The famous one in Monaco when we've got the only action we saw most of the race with, was it Gasly and Vettel going up the hill side by side, and they cut to a replay of Stroll running a bit wide. It's like, what are you doing? I don't think it's been great this year. At times, sometimes it's been fine, but I don't know if they're trying. I know they've tried new camera angles and all sorts. I don't know if they're trying new things, and maybe that's just taking a bit of time to iron out the creases, because you've got to bear in mind that now F1 have their own platform to broadcast on with F1 TV. They might be trying new things to maybe, I don't know, differentiate a bit. I don't know, because it goes on the world feed, doesn't it? But you know what I mean? They've got their own platform now with F1 TV, so there might be some stuff in there they're trialing that might need ironing out. But there are some weird TV direction decisions. But I suppose at the same time, I like to look at both sides, but sort of defend them a little bit, I guess, Stuart. 20 cars, flat out, racetrack, only so many cameras, so much going on. They want to capture as much as possible, don't they? So sometimes they might see something happening that they cut away from something else happening to go and look at that, but then maybe that was the wrong decision in hindsight, but at the time felt like it was going to be a big deal. I don't know. You might tell me that it looked all great this year and no issues whatsoever. I don't know, but it's not always great. And Jonty's made the point there, the start replays. Says unless there's a safety car until at least lap 5. Why are we... Somebody else, I think it was, it might be Motorsport Broadcasting on Twitter, it might not also reply to them. Why does it feel sometimes like, probably because it is the case, but they start the first lap replays, but we're still watching them for about 3 hours, or what feels like 3 hours, when you can't see the racing going on behind them. And just on that note as well, Sky Sports, you won't be listening. If you are, stop with your split screen in practice. I know practice is the most thrilling thing, but I'm paying to watch the cars. I know what Zach Brown looks like. I don't need a close-up of his face when you're talking to him, okay? Stop it. Unless it's cutting to Ted in the pits to look at a front wing issue or whatever, then just leave it. But yeah, the first lap replays, they are a bit excessive, and that's possibly an understatement.
It does sometimes feel like they've got like some kind of weird contractual obligation to show first lap replays on lap 3. And it's always like after the first, as soon as DRS kicks in, off to the... they could be a bit looser about how and when they insert those for definite. And I obviously, like as you said, I'm going to come out and defend a little bit because it is a very hard job to keep track of everything that's going on. But there have been a lot of times, I think, where not just me, but a lot of people who are sitting at home with one screen and maybe some live timing on their phone can spot where the battles are and when something exciting is happening, and we're either not looking at it or we cut away from it weirdly to something else. So I think they could do with some sharpening up, maybe a better way that the sort of broadcast team is run. So there's always the right people ready to kind of, I don't know, hit the alert button when something's going on and when we need to switch to something else. I know it's probably a really tricky job to manage all that, and I have no real idea of how it's all run, but yeah, they do tend to kind of miss things or not realize when stuff's going on. I do have to say, I feel sympathy with their need to show the winner crossing the line.
Yes.
Even if it's Verstappen 20 seconds ahead of everyone else. Like that's the winning moment of the race. You've got to capture that. But obviously there's going to be some times where people are still fighting and you've cutting away from that Alonso Perez battle, for example, to quickly show. And I think they managed that okay, because it was they got lucky that it was a moment where it died down for a couple of corners and they went straight back to it. But yeah, it's a tricky business, and I think they're not going to get everything right, but I think sometimes it was a little bit conspicuous this year.
Yeah, and it's just on the leaders as well. Quite a few people sort of complain about TV direction when there's a lot of focus through the whole race on the lead and the lead battles. And so we miss a lot of the fighting in the midfield and towards the back end of the grid, which I understand. But at the same time, from the TV director's point of view, the win is the most important result of the day, isn't it? Like you're saying now, with them crossing the line. So if you've got Verstappen, well, like for example, Singapore, if you've got a situation somewhere where you've got Sainz Norris, Russell, and Hamilton nose to tail for the win, with the greatest of respect to every driver, I don't really give a damn if Daniel Ricciardo's just sent one at the inside of Valtteri Bottas. I want to see that, and most people do. So, and that's why the timing tower having that little picture-in-picture thing, I think that could be utilised a lot more or a bit better, so that we can, if we have to watch or if we are watching the lead battle for obvious reasons, then maybe when you see a close battle between Bottas and Ricciardo, let's say, where there's 2/10, 3/10 between them, pop that up so you can sort of keep an eye on that whilst you're watching the main feed. So it'd be good to see that utilised a bit more, I think.
I'll tell you something that sometimes makes it quite conspicuous when the F1 feed is mucked up somewhere is I quite like watching before every race on the YouTube channel. They might do it on F1 TV as well. They put out a little video being like the 5 best battles of that particular track we're going to.
Yeah.
And there'll always be at least one where there's no commentary over the top because it hasn't been broadcast. Not even in like a replay. There's like nothing. So you just sort of have this kind of on board with no commentary at all. And it's clearly like, this was a great battle, but we didn't show it.
Unless you get the Drive to Survive crew to dub over the fake commentary.
Yes.
The obviously read from a script commentary. Johnsy just pointing out, yeah, but did you know you can go on board with all 20 drivers by pressing the red button?
Boy, do I know it. I don't even have a red button.
I do, but I'm not going to press it because I think the red button on the Sky box goes to the streaming feed, so it's like a minute behind. So when they're like, "Oh, you can sync up your onboards," it's like, yeah, if you pause your box for a minute, it's just a bit weird. But also, the frustrating thing with that, and the annoying thing as a viewer of Sky, I'm sure lots of people get the Sky feed over where they are as well. But the annoying thing is the way that even in Abu Dhabi, they were still plugging it as a new thing. New for 2023. Yes, it was new in Bahrain back in March. It's now nearly December. What are you doing? Just shut up, Crofty. We don't care. Sky Q or Sky Glass customer, as he says. It's like, oh. And there was a moment, I think it was in Abu Dhabi last weekend, where he was midway through doing his plug, and then some team radio came on. He listened to that, and then came back and went and finished the plug. And I'm like, I know they'll have contractually obliged to do that, but it's like, oh, God's sake. Yeah, very, very weird.
Lots of fun. Great for everyone.
Yeah, Brad says they used AI for track limits in Abu Dhabi. I've not read any more on that or whether that's going to happen, but I think, could AI be used in TV direction as well as track limits? Is there something that could be done there? We're all going to be talking about AI and how it stole our jobs. I'm joking. It may not. It's not Terminator, Sean. Stop panicking. Skynet isn't real yet. Yeah, Vesk says using multi-viewer. But yeah, do you think AI could be something that we see in F1 a bit more? Because I think the track limits with AI is a good idea. But as I understand it, the idea of that is that they kind of the AI will cut out the obvious inside the lines and then just refer the ones that are outside the lines or whatever. And so the stewards haven't got 3 million to look at on a Sunday afternoon, basically, after the race, I think is the idea of that. But I don't think AI is going to make every decision yet.
No, I'd be wary at doing that. And I feel also the word AI has almost lost all meaning, the way different people use it. But, whatever technology is useful and reliable enough to be able to monitor track limits, to help the stewards keep on top of it. I know track limits continue to be a thing this year, but I did feel like we were seeing less of it being an issue than last year.
There are a couple of races,
gave
weren't
a few
there?
penalties.
Where it was really bad.
But
Austria.
And they'll come up with some solutions eventually on that. But I remain glad that they are sort of just have a consistent line on track limits now. It's like, if you're out, you're out. And then 3 strikes and then you get a penalty. I'm glad it's consistent, and it wasn't like a couple of years ago where they were making up different rules for different corners every single race, and you had to kind of keep on track of what was allowed and what wasn't. And I know we had Qatar where we were painting the lines further in and stuff, but I don't know. I feel like it's been better.
Yeah, and I like that. I agree. I like the hard and fast rule, because then teams can moan about it and drivers can moan and argue about it, but there's then the answer, isn't there? Well, just then don't go outside the lines. And I know that people say, well, they're there to drive really fast. It's like, yeah, but these are the best drivers in the world. And I know these cars are difficult to see over. I think we're going back to the smaller tyres, aren't we, is the idea in 2026. So maybe it'll be less of an issue then. But you sort of think the best drivers in the world, it's like, oh, we're supposed to push really hard. It's like, yeah, but the white line's there, so you need to stay within it. So unfortunately, as much as we'd love to see you giving it everything, you've got to leave a little bit more on the table to make sure that you don't go over that white line. And some drivers, like a Verstappen, for example, seeing as he's just popped up on the picture there in Mexico on the podium, he gets a lap deleted for track limits. The next lap he posts a lap that might be slower than he'd want to do, but at least he gets his lap in, whereas a Logan Sargeant in Abu Dhabi just keeps putting the same track limits issue in because, you know, as you do. Maybe that's a learning curve, I don't know, but I don't mind the track limits thing. It's just, I get people's frustration with constantly hearing track limits this, track limits that, black and white flag, all of this business, but it's just a hard and fast rule, and it gets rid of, because it was far worse having, you can go wide at this corner, but you can't do it at that corner. But if you do it, but you can do it at this corner, but only if you go over this much of the curb and not. And it's like, no, just either white line, stick a wall there, or no track limits at all. just seriously, because it was just so confusing at times. But yeah. I think we'll wrap it up there, though. And just to give everyone an idea as to how close we are to next season already, Pirelli have already nominated the tyres for the first 3 races. It's not like Christmas yet. Come on, guys. I know logistics and that, but goodness me. And same, actually very quickly, Stuart, same compounds next year. No change in compound. Exactly the same tyres as this year for next year, but they've got rid of the C0, which we used so much this season, so it'll be a shame to see that go.
I'm going to miss it. Farewell, C0. It was a blah. Yeah. I mean, that's probably, we don't know that the compounds are the same compounds though either, do we?
Yeah, they are. They will be exactly the same as they were this year. They did all their tyre testing, but they've decided that they're sticking with these ones for next year.
That's fine until halfway through the season when they. But we still got to go to Qatar. but Qatar. I'm sure it'll be fine.
That's the meme now. But Qatar.
Maybe we'll have a special Qatar tyre.
Maybe that's what the CQ. Yeah, I was going to say that. Oh dear. Anyway, we'll wrap it up there. So we go for quite a while. Thank you so much, Stuart. It's been an absolute pleasure to chat to you again and get your perspective on the season, because we've not had it this year. This lot have heard me waffle way too much this season, so it's nice to get another view in there, and it's good to hear your voice again. I know a lot of chat are very happy to hear from you as well. So on to 2024, I guess, and 24 races, 30 with sprints.
Whew. Well, at least that's something to talk about.
Yeah, that's true.
Launches starting in the end of January, probably. So we'll just have a little rest.
Yeah, it will be. Yeah, hopefully it will be. Yeah.
Hopefully nothing crazy happens in the next few weeks, and we can actually just chill out for a bit.
Yeah, because there's because testing's slightly earlier. The first race is slightly earlier, isn't it? Because they practice on a Thursday. Yeah, could be the end of January for launches. Yeah,
with the brand new Racing Bulls livery.
Oh, goodness me! Don't. I hate that name. But yeah, thank you so much, Stuart. It's been a pleasure, and I'll talk to you shortly, I'm sure.
Lovely to talk to you. See you later, and have a good Christmas or whatever you do, everyone.
It's been a while since I've done that with a guest. Yes, thank you everyone for tuning in. Thank you to Stuart as well. It's been awesome to chat to him again, and thank you for you guys for coming along. Just a reminder, of course, first video of the waffles will be out on Tuesday. We've talked a lot today, and some of this might be repeated in those videos, but I know not everyone watches the stream, so streams, videos, separate things. So please do give them a watch if you get a chance. If you don't want to watch them, you know, it's the winter, quiet times, just stick it on in the background on mute if you want. Just give it a view. It'd be appreciated, a bit of interaction, and leave me a comment as well. That's out Tuesday. Then, like I say, Thursday will be the second one, and that will run every Thursday 4 p.m. For the end of season waffles up to the 28th, not 38th, 28th of December. You can follow me on social media as well. That's massively appreciated as always. And you can support the channel through Super Chat, Streamlabs, Patreon, channel membership, all of that business. And as I say, I think this is probably the last stream of the season. If I can squeeze one in, just me and you, for a bit of a 90-minute Q&A at some point. I will, but I can't promise that, so I won't schedule it. So just there might be a surprise one at some point, but I'm not sure yet. But the videos will be out, and that's the most important thing. So just in case, have a fantastic Christmas if you celebrate Christmas. Just enjoy the holiday period and a fantastic New Year as well. Hope you have a great time. I will be back next season, as I say. Definitely going to be back for 2024, so that's good news. Looking forward to that, as always. Thank you for your support this year. It's been an absolute pleasure. You've been fantastic. I know we've had a disagreement, some of us, and we've had our arguments and our rants and our shouting at each other, but we're a family. It happens. Oh, that's so cheesy. I love it. We're a family, and we all fall out from time to time, and have differing opinions. But it's been cracking to talk to you, and thank you so much for your support this year, and hopefully into next year as well. Enjoy your Christmas, enjoy your New Year, enjoy your holidays. Get those festive tunes on. There's some corkers. There always is. But yes, I'm going to disappear now. So thank you for watching. I've been Sean. This has been the F1 Word. And until next time, goodbye.